Okay, finally at long last, it's time to do a Joshi Puro video. There's no end of subjects to cover here, from tremendous feuds and legends to some of the darker passages in its history, but I'm just going to keep it simple here. It probably wouldn't be fair to Joshi to start off with one of the lower points after all, so instead we're going high. Perhaps to the highest peak Joshi has ever had, even. The middle of the 1980s, when for a short time Joshi ruled the entire wrestling landscape in Japan, a period that would set up the continued success that it would have for the rest of the 1980s and a good chunk of the next decade. And a lot of that had to do with the biggest feud going, the clash between the bright, energetic crossover superstars the Crush Gals and the most savage and ruthless heels in the business, the Atrocious Alliance. And you can perhaps reduce it down even further than that. At the heart of hearts, it's a feud between Chigusa Nagayo and Dump Matsumoto. To just retell the big moments of the feud would be one approach. The searing drama involved in the matches that the teams had, and specifically the matches that Chigusa and Dump had, would be more than enough to carry this video, perhaps because the matches these two had have never been repeated, and as a sheer display of storytelling and emotion in the ring, are pretty hard to match, let alone beat. Still, there's a lot to say about the background of Joshi, the background of these two legends and the tough road they both took to get to the top stage, how the Crush Gals became such a mainstream phenomenon, the incredible stresses put on the pair at the height of their fame that almost could have made them want to legitimately hurt each other, the obsession of the fans, the sheer chaos of the All Japan Women locker room. There's a lot here, and as best as I possibly can, I'm going to try and cover all bases. But Chigusa and Dump will always be the constant. So, let us begin. It's important to have a bit of background before we start the full story, and not even just for those who don't know what Joshi Pro-Res even means, although you've probably guessed by now that it means women's wrestling. The beginning of women's wrestling in Japan is pretty murky, but it got started a couple of years or so after the Second World War. There are a lot of similarities here to the startup of regular Pro-Res. Joshi did gradually gain traction in the 1950s, largely thanks to the appearance of American stars, specifically the legendary pioneer Mildred Burke. Burke toured Japan with women's wrestling exhibitions at around the same time Lou Thesz was doing much the same thing against Rikidozan and creating history, and the likes of Mei Yun and the fabulous Moolah would also have their parts to play in the early years. But whereas regular Puro quickly gained form thanks to the huge success of Rikidozan and the JWA, the early years of Joshi were largely chaotic, ill-formed and underground until 1968, when a loose connection of small promotions, brought together by Takashi Matsunaga and his brothers, merged into the first real major promotion Joshi had: All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling, usually known simply as AJW or All Japan Women, and no relation at all to Giant Bubba's All Japan Pro Wrestling. The new promotion was given legitimacy by the NWA first off when their women's champion, Moolah, toured there in 1968 and did a brief title swap with the company's first major headliner, Yukiko Tomoe. The early years largely consisted of these title swaps until, after a while, AJW had enough stars to stand on their own 2 feet in pursuit of their major title, the WWWA Championship, a belt revived by the company that was originally around the waist of Mildred Burke. WWA was her company and it was long dead. Title scraps aren't really going to be a part of this video, but this further legitimacy would see less of a need for major American stars coming over. Much Fumike was perhaps the first serious AJW star for a couple of years from 1973, and she also set up the blueprint for AJW stars also releasing songs, attempting to get some crossover appeal. Fumike would soon be joined by the likes of Nancy Kumi and Mimi Hajirawa, but AJW really took off with the introduction of the biggest of all their 70s acts, Jackie Sato and Maki Oida, otherwise known as the Beauty Pair. It would be pretty silly not to look at the Beauty Pair here. They are in every way the precursor to the Crush Gals. As well known as they were by wrestling fans for their in-ring exploits, the Beauty Pair did also manage to break out into the mainstream and release hit songs. Something about the novelty of these two highly athletic women going out there and sinning seemed to strike a chord, and their chart success would attract a whole new audience to Joshi, teenage girls and the like who were in love with the Beauty Pair. Jackie Sato would even have a singles feud with a power heel, the Canadian Wanda Sin, then known as Monster Ripper. So yeah, there are a lot of parallels between the Beauty Pair and the Crush Gals. With the beauty pair leading the way, AJW were unquestionably the top women's promotion in the country. It was basically a monopoly. And their success paved the way for a whole generation of greats. While AJW had a mandatory retirement age of 26, meaning that the beauty pair were essentially done by about 1981 or so, the creation of new stars came thick and fast. The turn of the 1980s and the late period of the beauty pair sees the rise of a whole new batch of legendary stars, the likes of Jaguar Yokota, Devil Masami, the Jumping Bomb Angels, several of whom were trained by Jackie Sato herself. These were wrestlers who would enrich the whole of wrestling, legitimately some of the best to ever do it, male or female. Jaguar Yokota alone has added more to the art of modern day wrestling, certainly in terms of moves innovated, than, geez, almost everybody. From the early 80s onwards, the standard of wrestling in AJW was phenomenally high. The great Mildred Burke had a vision of women's wrestling being treated as legitimately as men's wrestling was, and in Japan at least, that became a reality. And the next generation of stars to come out of the AJW dojo only continue it on. We see the likes of Lioness Asuka, Bull Nakano, and of course, Chigusa Nagayo and Hiroyo Matsumoto. It's here, around about 1980, where we begin this story in earnest. For some, the road through the dojo can be relatively simple. Still tough, but some aces just shine immediately. Lioness Asuka, the eventual other half of the Crush Gals, is a good example. Ultra athletic, a quick learner, the sort of person who gets picked out as being a star on the first day, and this will prove to be utterly correct. Bull Nakano similarly is something of a hotshot. Her natural power and talent will make her a big deal fairly quickly. You'd think the same would be true of Chigusa Nagayo and Hiroyo Matsumoto. But no, it was anything but. No one ever picked out either Chigusa or Hiroyo as aces through their training. For them, the road just to get inside the ring and debut was incredibly long and difficult. They struggled to earn the respect of their elders and peers, and several times one or the other were on the verge of dropping out of the dojo completely. For two of the most successful wrestlers in the history of Joshi, it's an inauspicious start. Matsumoto and Nagayo, both part of AJW's class of 1980, didn't necessarily fit in a lot of the time. Either Chigusa was too scrawny, or Hiroyo was too burly. The infamously harsh AJW dojo system was particularly brutal towards them. Hiroyo in particular has many stories of bullying and hazing inflicted upon her by seniors. Indeed, if it weren't for just the sheer persistency in attempting to get to the dojo as a way of getting out of an awful situation growing up, she may have never been there at all. On multiple occasions they were both on the very edge of dropping out of the dojo, and on several other occasions the main advice they were given as newcomers was that they should just retire and get it over with already. Through this shared hardship, the pair would form a certain bond in their early years, even if the peak of their careers would put them against each other. Ultimately, the pair would make it onto shows, but still spent their first couple of years drifting around as misfits with little direction or character, only occasionally being featured on cards. The sort of people who you may see a few times kicking around in the opening matches, but that never travel beyond this stage and disappear as soon as you notice them. The characters with which the two would achieve stardom with took a while to come to life. You can see evidence in that in some of the early matches that are out there, such as Hiroyo Matsumoto going one-on-one with Lioness Asuka in around about 1982 or so. It's certainly far removed from what was to come, taking place in front of an appreciative but quiet crowd, and ultimately resulting in victory for the more fancied Asuka. As for Chigusa, well, it was a similar story. It took a while for the plucky face to really come to the forefront, and she just drifted along for the first couple of years of the 1980s, just like Hiroyo. Not much feature, and not much chance to really make a mark and get over with the crowd. Eventually, in late 1982, things do change, but for both Hiroyo and Chigusa, it's not so much a sign that they're finally going up the card, it's more like a last chance. If this doesn't work, well, that's probably going to be it. For Hiroyo, the start of an opportunity came when she was able to join the Devil Corps, a stable led by main eventer and then heel Devil Masami. With this and a change of name to Kaoru Matsumoto, her heelish tendencies in the ring gradually started to take over, particularly in tandem with her new tag team partner, fellow class of 1980 graduate Crane Yu. For Chigusa, her last shot comes in the form of a tag team with Lioness Asuka. The purpose is to try and do the old tried and tested beauty pair formula, putting two face wrestlers together, getting them into the recording studio and trying to make an impact that way. If this doesn't work, Asuka may well be alright, but Chigusa? Probably done. And the result of this formation would, of course, be the Crush Gals. In 1983 it turned Asuka and Nagayo into superstars. The Crush Gals have a pretty firm case of being the most popular stars in all of Pro Res in the 1980s, male or female. There's only a couple of names that could really be in the same conversation, the likes of Akira Maeda and what have you. And weirdly, the name of the Crush Gals almost positioned them as female followers of Maeda, due to it also being one of his nicknames. But really? Nah, it's undoubtedly the Crush Gals, all the way. They were the biggest stars in the entire history of the All Japan Women promotion, and by far and away the biggest stars in the history of Joshi Pro Res. In fact, it's pretty easy to make a case for Chigusa Nagayo specifically as the most influential and most popular star in the whole history of women's wrestling. It's possible others may make it there, certainly with the way the WWE is now. Perhaps the likes of Becky Lynch will enter the conversation at some stage, but they've still got a way to go here. The success of the Crush Gals literally took Joshi Pro Res, as done by the AJW, from something that was still a late night viewing, like all other pro companies, to prime time. What was it that made the Crush Gals so immediately popular? They quickly eclipsed the success of the beauty pair. They went on a run of top 10 singles, selling hundreds of thousands of copies. And naturally, the result of this was a new and altogether much louder audience for AJW's shows. Whenever the Crush Gals entered the arena, they were almost uncontrollable. A near-splitting chant of Chigusa, Asuka starts to the tune of their hit theme, and many times the bed of teenage girls screaming simply doesn't stop throughout the whole match. And this was every night. I don't know, maybe this is what it would have been like if John Lennon and Paul McCartney, at the height of Beatlemania, decided to form a tag team and get in the ring for whatever reason. There's not a whole lot else to compare it to, quite frankly. With Nagayo and Asuka as the top stars, titles and such didn't even really matter. They transcended all of that, basically transcended all of wrestling's boundaries, much in the way a Hulk Hogan or Rock or Steve Austin does. The AJW wrestling show is moved from late nights to primetime viewing, and at the peak of the Gals' popularity it will effortlessly get 10-point plus ratings every time out. These are massive, unprecedented numbers for Joshi that will never happen again. And still, it's not entirely about the Crush Gals. They do need a heel foil. Through their breakout year of 1983, that tends to come in the form of the aforementioned Devil Core, and this will be the first time that the Crush Gals really lock horns with the team of Kyowa Matsumoto and Crane Yu, who are more than ready to send the two idols crashing into guardrails, or use the stairs, or anything else that's nearby to hurt them, much to the horror of the crowd. Still, the Gals will usually prevail. However, things in AJW do change fast, and as 1983 closes, it's clear that the Devil Core are on the way out. The older talent are reaching the mandatory retirement age of 26, and Devil Masami herself wants to go back to being a face. The young Kaoru Matsumoto and Crane Yu are selected to be the Crush Gals' main opponents going forward, to form a stable that will provide the Crush Gals with that necessary foil. Much like Chigusa did a year previously, Kyowa Matsumoto, she who at many points was mere seconds away from packing up and leaving the dojo, has reached her last chance. Go all out, right now, or go home. A decision was quickly made. January 1984 saw the beginnings of what, eventually, would become known as the Atrocious Alliance, with Kaoru Matsumoto at the head and Crane Yu as second in command. Later members will include the hotshot Bull Nakano and Condor Saito. But most importantly, one day in January sees a complete change in Matsumoto. One day she appears, her hair a shocking short blonde and covered in Kiss-esque face paint. The change, which was not agreed on beforehand by the company's top brass, is nevertheless thoroughly welcomed by chairman Takashi Matsunaga. In an interview long after the fact, she reveals that she wrote a note of sorts to her mother, saying that her daughter is going to be hated by all of Japan, and that she should assume her eldest daughter is no more. Hiroyo and Kyowa Matsumoto were now dead. Dump Matsumoto is here. The very appearance of Dump Matsumoto, a Joshi heavyweight complete with lat face paint, the Singapore cane that would be indiscriminately waved at anyone in her path, and even somewhat controversially the occasional swastika on the forehead, was unlike anything else in Joshi at the time. No one had ever had that sort of aura. And that look translated to the ring. In Dump matches, the rules basically went out of the window immediately. There were no depths that Dump and the Atrocious Alliance wouldn't stoop to, and absolutely nobody was safe. If the referee got in the way, they'd probably get assaulted too. Seconds, cameramen, commentators, woe betide anyone who so much as looked at Dump the wrong way. Biting, chairs, blades, chains, tables, forks. Dump had that look and feel of a genuine psycho, as if she had channeled everyone who had ever bullied her, from her father to trainers and seniors in AJW, into this one complete monster. It is an all-time character. Dump Matsumoto is one of the most effective and greatest heels in all of wrestling. Well and truly something else. Of course, this all worked out pretty well immediately. Leaving aside the high level of talent possessed by the likes of Lioness Asuka, Crane Yu and Bull Nakano, the duo of Dump and Chigusa was at the heart of it all. Simply, you had the perfect heel and the perfect face. 1980s Chigusa is just about the perfect face in peril, amongst the very elite in the category, the likes of Ricky Morton, so capable of selling a beating that you couldn't help but be on her side to be sucked into the incredible tag matches. And Dump was more than capable of dishing out that terrifying beating, the one that makes you forget the predetermined nature of wrestling completely. It's hard to even really just recommend specific matches from the lengthy set of duels between the Atrocious Alliance and the Crush Gals. They are basically all worth watching. The Alliance had excellent matches against the likes of the Jumping Bomb Angels too, but the Crush Gals matches were the ones that really meant so much. It has to be said, a lot of that had to do with the young crowd as well. You've got this crowd who already went totally wild for the Crush Gals, who had that sort of parasocial relationship with the duo where they almost felt like they were in the ring with them. They identified with them so much. They idolised them, of course. And then, in Dump Matsumoto and the Atrocious Alliance, you had the manifestation of every bully they had ever faced. These matches were like an inferno, an unstoppable wall of screams, of a whole audience feeling every single shot that the Crush Gals took. When Chigusa hurt, they hurt too. I'm not sure if there's anything else that's comparable to just how the AJW audience felt about these matches. And this is just in 1984, when they're still competing mainly in tags. There is one way to ratchet this up further, to go absolutely critical mass, and it's about to happen. Perhaps the most emotional singles feud in the history of wrestling. Dump and Chigusa, fellow graduates and at one point close friends, did get to something of a stage where the rivalry almost consumed the pair of them, and the relationship between them was pushed to the limit. A lot of these flames were fanned by AJW's chairman, Takashi Matsunaga, and the intensely toxic atmosphere behind the scenes in the company. Matsunaga wanted the feud to feel as real as possible, and rather than simply rely on the innate skill of the performers, he would work both of them and spread rumours to the other, talk that the other one didn't want to work with them anymore. It was all bullshit, of course, but in this intense atmosphere, with the company at their commercial peak, and all the stress on their shoulders, it made Dump and Chigusa almost get to the point of hating each other. At least until a little after the peak, when they got together and realised that it was all basically a pack of lies. As if that wasn't enough, the job itself couldn't be more stressful. If it was bad for the Crush Gals and the Alliance, right at the top of the company, it was even worse for everybody else. All Japan Women could be a very toxic place indeed, a workplace full of manipulation, tittle-tattling and bullying. Quite a few of the younger wrestlers would flock to Dump Matsumoto and her crew because of this. As someone who'd experienced a lot of bullying herself, Dump would not engage in the practice behind the scenes and try to encourage straight talking in her flock, as opposed to backstage bitching. Of course, Matsunaga would not let faces travel with Dump's team on the heel bus, but it could at least provide some sort of temporary refuge for people from the toxicity that permeated All Japan Women. Still, travelling with Dump and the heel team comes with its own problems in the shape of the sheer hatred that people had for Dump. In these days, with Dump as the top heel in all of Japanese wrestling, it's not uncommon for Dump's car to be vandalised, or for her mother's house to have items thrown at it. One time, there was a stalker hanging around, looking for a chance to jump on Dump alone and murder her. Another time, a broken beer bottle was held to her chest in a nightclub. Several times, angry fans would surround the Alliance's bus after a show and just refuse to let them leave. In fact, one night, an All Japan Women male security guard actually punched Dump in the face as she entered the arena, putting the blame for all of this trouble entirely on her shoulders. It's not a nice situation. Even if the pay at this time is very good, despite the Matsunaga's propensity to take the lion's share and lend some of AJW's profits from tickets, television and merchandise for themselves, from an early stage, Dump, and most likely Chigusa too, may have been wondering if it was worth it for all of this stress. This is the hidden backdrop to the feud between the atrocious Alliance and the Crush Girls as we reach the middle of 1985 and it enters the peak, the critical stage. As incredibly popular as the gals are, we are coming to a point where Chigusa Nagayo and Lioness Asuka are surely going to be worth a hell of a lot on their own. They've achieved everything together, but it's just about time for them to fly on their own. Both of them have singles matches against the very best there is, with August 22nd, 1985 providing not just a great look into the contrast between the two Crush Gals, but two of the best matches in Joshi history. First off, Asuka wrestles an all-time classic against the legendary Jaguar Yokota. An epic encounter, everything you would expect out of a great traditional wrestling match. It gets heated, of course, but there's a lot of respect here. A truly great 30-minute bout in which Jaguar Yokota ultimately comes out on top. Most certainly a very important match in the career of Lioness Asuka, one that will set up a Hall of Fame worthy singles career. The other match is an entirely different matter. As everything comes to a head between the Crush Gals and the atrocious Alliance, the personal emotion between Dump Matsumoto and Chigusa Nagayo spills into the storyline, with Chigusa now challenging Dump to not just a singles match, but a hair versus hair match. Titles have never been a focus in this feud, but we're well beyond anything like that now. This is a matter of pride. As often as hair versus hair can be treated like more of a joke in American wrestling, this is more like what hair versus hair is in Lucha Libre. For the loser, this is essentially going to cause a great deal of shame to have something so personal taken away from you. This is the level that the feud has got to. It cannot end without either Dump or Chigusa taking something so dear and so personal away from the other. The stage is set for a match that, quite frankly, stands entirely on its own. Dump Matsumoto vs Chigusa Nagayo on August 22nd, 1985 still stands as one of the most intense matches I have ever seen. It doesn't take much to figure out that, for most of it, Chigusa has to wrestle from behind. On this night it seems as almost nothing is in her favour, not even the referee. Every single time she gets an advantage is greeted by the most rapturous, loudest screams from the crowd. But it's almost matched by the screams of horror every time Dump simply brutalises Chigusa, using just about every weapon she can, from chains to chairs, the house microphone and even the scissors themselves, relentlessly jabbed into Chigusa's forehead and busting her open. Even the two wrestlers' seconds outside the ring, trained normally to never interfere in what's going on inside no matter what, are just about uncontrollable. Chigusa fights as hard as she possibly can, and there's a couple of times when you can almost sense that maybe, against all odds, she could defeat Dump on this night. But sometimes, well, the Cinderella story doesn't happen. A final, decisive chair shot is enough to send Chigusa down for a 10 count and to give Dump Matsumoto the knockout win. Despite everything that happens in this match, from bell to bell it's actually only 12 minutes long. However, the aftermath of this match is even more famous. As much as Chigusa's seconds, including Asuka, don't want it to happen, it will happen. No matter how much they dispute with the seconds, or the clearly incompetent referee, who seemed to miss just about every occasion in which Dump laid down a strike with a weapon or anything illegal at all, but was always quick to stop Chigusa whenever she responded in kind. Finally, after a defiant shout from Chigusa and even more chaos, the clippers are all that remain. The reaction from the crowd is, it's something else. As Chigusa's seconds continue to be held back and the referee performs the task of cutting her hair, the crowd are screaming in what can be described as agony, as if this is something horrific that's going to live with them forever. There's cuts to these young teenagers in absolute floods of tears at what they're seeing. It's not something you often see in wrestling, it has to be said. I can't think of too many storyline occurrences in the whole of wrestling history that brought an audience to this level of emotion and sheer anguish. Needless to say, it was another long night for Dump's bus. They could not leave the arena for many hours. Clearly these girls just wanted to talk. Dump vs Chigusa 1 is one of the most emotional matches in wrestling history, of that there's no doubt. It's one of the greatest heel and face clashes, although in many ways it's hard to compare it to much else. Compare this to the other classic on this card, the match between Jaguar Yokota and Lioness Asuka, and you'll find a complete opposite. Nothing about this match at all is traditional wrestling, it's much more comparable to a hardcore brawl. Not the first in Joshi and certainly not the last, but the whole circumstance of this match, the surroundings, this being AJW at the peak of its success, watched by millions in primetime with the Crush Gals and Dump transcending wrestling and being national mainstream stars, the inferno of the crowd, it defies a description that would ever do it justice. It entirely transcends the boundaries of professional wrestling to tell a story in a way that anyone could understand and feel in their heart. Joshi has produced many incredible moments, but this one may well be the most impactful of them all. We now cut to November 1986. By this time the Crush Gals have fully broken up, amicably going their separate ways. Lioness Asuka is ready to go all out to win the top belt to earn her place as the WWWA champion. But for Chigusa Nagayo, there is still a very big loose end that even a finals appearance in the 1986 Grand Prix tournament cannot resolve. There's no way that she can leave the Crush Gals behind and firmly take her own place at the top without finally paying back in kind and taking revenge for the shame of having her hair cut. To move on fully, she has to defeat Dump Matsumoto once and for all. The insult cannot be unanswered, and a post-match incident in which the Alliance cut up her clothes sets the scene for a rematch 15 months in the making. Dump vs Chigusa, hair vs hair 2. The appearance of Dump by this stage is more intense than ever. The short bob of hair now replaced by a giant mohawk, the face paint so severe and uncompromising that she looks like a punk Onibaba. Even before the bell there's lots to talk about. There's a much slower start, almost as if Dump might be showing some grudging respect. Until she spits water at Chigusa, and then proceeds to beat up the referee with a chain, busting him open in an attempt to simply get disqualified and not truly give Chigusa what she wants. Chigusa begs for the DQ not to happen as the ref, the same one from the first match, gets patched up, and ultimately Matsunaga relents. There is no getting out of this match happening. The second Dump Chigusa match, when compared to the first, isn't as much of a run through sheer chaos. It is perhaps more traditional and certainly a longer match, but it is no less of a dramatic encounter. It's more like being dragged through hell with a chain, a crowd that doesn't stop screaming for the 20 or so minutes that this match takes place in, and a Dump Matsumoto that is more heinous than ever. Chigusa's fighting is incredible too, of course. The way she sells, you could feel her pain and defiance at the very edge of the universe, even as she is increasingly covered by a Muta-scale breaking crimson mask from the endless abuse Dump puts her through. The fork, the scissors themselves, a chain, a waste paper bin, even being choked with the blunt part of a sword. No one is safe from Dump's wrath, certainly not the referee who takes a pretty hefty beating himself through the course of the match, and certainly not Chigusa's seconds who do try to stop the horror and get cut up themselves for their trouble. There's one particular moment where Chigusa walks around, seemingly in a total daze, paraded around by Dump with a chain, where this whole match and indeed this whole story, not just of this boiling point of their whole careers, seems to come to a head, where as a watcher you feel the whole thing right in the pit of your stomach. And yet Chigusa simply refuses to give in. No matter what, she will not be put down for the 3 count, even if the beatings are so long lasting and the moments where she gets any foothold in the match at all are so fleeting. In the end, Dump attempts to win the same way as she did the first time, through knocking her out. and again Chigusa refuses to give in. Dump treats the ending as inevitable, as if it doesn't really matter. Eventually, Chigusa will not be able to get up, and it is here where finally she meets her downfall. As she walks around Lorin, saluting the crowd, calling this a fait accompli, Chigusa gets an opportunity to roll her up from behind, and the referee just calls it a 3 count. The crowd absolutely goes wild, obviously. Needless to say, Dump and the Alliance are not happy. They'll beat up anyone in sight over it, including the poor old referee. They'll even attempt to leave before Chigusa rages, calling Dump back to face what's coming. Finally she does, sitting motionless as the giant multicoloured mohawk is shaved off. Naturally, Dump will not leave with any kind of good grace. She will certainly take her anger out on anything that so happens to be in sight, and if you've never seen a Japanese audience actually throw trash at a wrestler, well, you can see it here. But in the end, Chigusa has gotten her revenge, even if she had to go through hell and back to get it. Even with that in mind, there is still a sense of triumph. Hell, there's even a redemption for the referee who appeared to warn Chigusa so badly in the first bout. Chigusa Dump 2 is quite different in a lot of ways to the first match, but again, it's no less incredible. It's the climax to one of the greatest feuds in the history of pro wrestling, and like the first, it simply has to be seen in full without me bleating all over it. The storytelling of wrestling, quite simply, is at its peak here. Now, believe it or not, we are at a stage where, at least according to the bosses of All Japan Women, the careers of these women should be coming to a close. For both Dump and Chigusa, the mandatory retirement age of 26 is drawing ever near. Now, this particular foible of AJW could be seen in some ways, certainly I guess was seen by the bosses, as necessary. Turnover in these days was incredibly fast, and new dojo classes could expect to see literally thousands of applicants in these salad days. But it was also kind of arbitrary, to say the least. For Hiroya Matsumoto, retirement couldn't come soon enough. The emotional toll of playing Dump Matsumoto had been a heavy one. Far from just straining her friendship with Chigusa Nagayo, it had a profound effect on her daily life. Playing a character so effectively translated into a very real hatred that did at times put her in serious danger, although she banked on it also being the fin that would take her to a successful career in entertainment outside of wrestling, which indeed it would do for a good few years. For others, like Chigusa Nagayo, due to retire in 1989, well, retirement wasn't necessarily welcomed all the way. Indeed, that was the case for a lot of wrestlers. The mandatory retirement age that AJW set would, sure enough, be one of the things that firmly stopped their 1980s dominance from becoming a forever-lasting monopoly, especially once the golden generation of the decade found themselves feeling like they had a hell of a lot more to do. Enter new promotions, filled with ex-AJW stars, the first of them being the highly successful JWP, filled with the likes of Devil Masami, Cutie Suzuki, and later stars like Dynamite Kansai and Mayumi Ozaki. It's here where Chigusa Nagayo would create the second part of her incredible pro wrestling legacy. In 1995, she formed one of the most successful and best remembered of all the Joshi promotions, Gaia, which also set the stage for a reunion and bitter feud with her former partner in the Crush Gals, Lioness Asuka, who would become, surprisingly enough, another one of Joshi's greatest ever heels. As many others did over the years, she showed that she most certainly had a hell of a lot of upside as a main event talent beyond the age of 26. AJW kind of did a very silly thing. From holding a total monopoly on Joshi, they ended up creating their own competition. And eventually, this competition, the strains of the 90s recession, the heavy contraction in the 2000s of the wrestling market as a whole and Joshi in particular, as well as the Matsunaga brothers' own profligate spending, put a serious dampener on AJW. They went from being the only name in the business to quite literally out of business in 2005. Along with the likes of FMW and the original JWA, they are one of the biggest of all Japanese wrestling promotions to end up folding completely. What of Dump and Chigusa, in the end? Was there a resolution? We now go to February 25th, 1988, Dump's televised retirement match, which will see her pair up with fellow top star Yukari Amori, who's also retiring tonight, against Of course, the Crush Gals. Retirements in wrestling are often an emotional thing, and despite being a super heel, Dumps is most certainly no exception. It's definitely a bit special. The first part of it is naturally a reminder of how hard these four can go. It's not like the weapons are just going to stop because it's the last night, after all. It all gets chaotic and ends in a no contest, but then we get something different. For 5 minutes only, Dump and Chigusa team together, against Asuka and Emori. It's all thoroughly lapped up by the crowd to see these two incredible rivals finally teaming before at last the bell rings. At the end, after the feud and after all the craziness of the past few years, there's a highly emotional embrace between Dump and Chigusa before the two retirees stand in the middle of the ring, their accomplishments are read out and the 10 bells ring. AJW always tried to make these feel so final, as if wrestling is well and truly over for these people. Of course, Joshi's no different to any other form of pro wrestling, and 9 times out of 10, these retiring wrestlers would be coming back elsewhere. Or indeed to AJW a few years later, when they obviously had to start letting wrestlers who they'd retired return. That said, following a smaller final handicap match against fellow Alliance members a couple of days later in a hometown venue, which if anything is even more emotional with tears from everyone, including Dump, as she got the chance to wrestle her last match in front of her mother, that was actually it for her for quite a long time. What with a pretty decent entertainment career and such to come, it would be 15 or so years before Dump Matsumoto returned to the ring, and at the time she never expected to cross those ropes again. However, she gradually found her love of pro wrestling returning, and came back to the circuit in 2003 first to help out the ailing AJW, and after the company's inevitable demise, as a freelancer. Older perhaps, but certainly able to remind everyone of her incredible act. Just a couple of months ago, in August, Dump and Chigusa celebrated their 40th anniversaries in the business with a jointly promoted show, featuring both of them on the opposing sides of a tag team match. You know, just the sort of thing that undoubted legends of the business should do. And yet, even now, it still almost feels strange. The ghosts of the past remain. As predetermined and as choreographed as wrestling can be, no one may have ever reached this intensity level again in wrestling, this feeling of pure hatred without legitimately wanting to kill their opponent. Dump and Chigusa will forever have a place that is completely on their own. Bye for now. For a great deal of my time watching pro-res, particularly on the internet, it was pretty common for people to focus on watching one particular match. There's this one meeting that you've got to see, this big encounter that everyone's talking about, or it's just something you've found while searching full match into whatever P2P program you were using. We didn't necessarily focus so much on the card as a whole, watching every match as a prelude to the big bout, or even getting all that much of the story behind a bout. A lot of times you just had the match itself, and whatever info there was surrounding the bout by those in the know. Now I don't believe that this just happened in the internet days. From what I understand, a great deal of the tapes that people swapped around in the trading days would be more like a compilation of matches rather than whole cards. And in fact, the big match itself was usually what the big promotions television programs would focus on. You've got a small time slot in the dead of night. Naturally, it's going to feature the main event and very little else. Going back to the Misawa Kawada series we just finished, a lot of those matches were commercially released on videotape. And yes, that's the match exclusively, not the full card that surrounded it. There are of course some exceptions to this rule. From the 1990s there are two in particular that spring to mind immediately as shows where the recommendation is that you absolutely have to watch the whole lot. The first one is New Japan's 1994 Super J-Cup, a one-night junior tournament with a whole load of overarching stories, absolutely packed with iconic matches that's still considered one of the very best shows in the company's history. The other one would be All Japan Women's first Dream Slam event from 1993, a show that is also commonly thought as one of the very best, if not the very best pro wrestling supercard of the 1990s, full stop. It's a long show, in fact it's over 5 hours long. But over the course of those 5 hours, AJW and the entire world of Joshi produce a card that's filled from top to bottom with unmissable action. It was the perfect summary of just how phenomenal the standard of wrestling was in All Japan Women and Joshi Pro Res at the time, better perhaps than anywhere else in the entire world. It was, for many years, basically the only card to feature 2 entirely separate matches rated 5 stars by the Wrestling Observer, something that only happened again at Night 1 of Wrestle Kingdom 14 in 2020. Mind you, All Japan Women did it again later in 1993 in 2 matches with the same teams, because, well, they were incredible at the time. So it's simply time to look at the first Dream Slam in full, the legendary night of April 2nd, 1993. This will mostly just be going through the show, it is 5 hours long after all, but there will be a little bit of background as to how we got here, and plenty on the participants. The night has had an iconic status for a long time, big enough for Stardom to revive the name a few years ago as a way of claiming their place as AJW's true successor. Back then, it was the catalyst for another big boom period in Joshi Pro Res that would ultimately lead All Japan Women to the big egg itself. It's not a bad way to celebrate your anniversary, is it? Let us begin. As I just alluded to, the main aim of the AJW Dream Slam was to celebrate the company's 25th anniversary. Founded in 1968 by the Matsumoto brothers, they'd had periods of irrelevance mixed with huge periods of popularity, usually times when the company's wrestlers would be successful not just in wrestling, but in entertainment. The last time we looked at Joshi, we looked at the company's previous boom period back in the mid-80s, a time that was dominated by the incredibly popular Crush Gals team of Chigusa Nagayo and Lioness Asuka, and the atrocious alliance led by Dump Matsumoto. Their wars were legendary, emotional, and watched by many people. As we got to the end of the 1980s, and these wrestlers reached the company's mandatory retirement age of 26, naturally things would die down a little bit. But a lot of young folk were naturally inspired by what they saw on the television. It's fair to categorise the raft of truly incredible dojo classes that would come down the pipe in the years to come as being mostly made up of Crush Gals and Atrocious Alliance fans, and these were the wrestlers that would contribute to a wholly different Joshi boom. There's something else to talk about here, of course. In the time since the feud between the Crush Gals and the Alliance, a great deal of things have changed. For many years, AJW was pretty much the only Joshi game in town, and they did have certain quirks, chief amongst them being that retirement age. Essentially, wrestlers would have around 10 years to do their thing, and then it would all be over. They leave Joshi behind, and new folks come in to replace them. It seems wild nowadays that this was a thing, but it was primarily down to old school societal reasons, and the stigma that came with being a leftover woman who hadn't married by the age of 30. So you do your Joshi, dedicate yourself entirely to that, and then leave in order to fulfill your duties as a woman, I guess. Old-fashioned? Well, absolutely. But such was the way of things back then, and not necessarily just in Japan, China and other Asian countries. Needless to say, this was a big part of why AJW's business could be so volatile and filled with hills and valleys, but it was the way things were done. However, particularly after such a golden generation, you did have quite a few high-level wrestlers who, well, they weren't exactly willing to quit just because they were closer to 30 than 20, and they were certainly popular enough to exist in a world outside of Zen Joshi, or Zenjo. In the second half of the 1980s, new companies would begin to form and take their own place in the world of Joshi, first and biggest amongst them being JWP, or Japan Women's Pro Wrestling. The new company would contain a great deal of former AJW stars, the legendary Jackie Sato, Devil Masami, Haruhi Saito and Itsuki Yamazaki, formerly of the Jumping Bomb Angels, chief amongst them. But there would also be new stars too, with the likes of Mayumi Yazaki, Dynamite Kansai and Cutie Suzuki making their name here, not to mention a certain shooter by the name of Shinobu Kandori. While some of these wrestlers started in the AJW dojo or were initially rejected by them, they'd find their way to the new company, and soon enough they were training up wrestlers themselves. In 1992, due to an internal dispute, the original Japan Women's Pro Wrestling would split into two different companies. The more classically pro wrestling folk would remain under the banner of JWP, now called JWP Joshi Pro Res, while the more shoot-inclined wrestlers, led by Shinobu Kandori, would form Ladies Legends Pro Wrestling, or LLPW. The closest thing really that Joshi had to a UWF-esque shoot-style promotion. Shinobu Kandori was also one of the more legit people in the business. She had once been a high-level judoka, skilled enough to win bronze at the World Championships in 1984, and at a point where she could have competed at the 1988 Seoul Olympics before deciding to switch to pro wrestling. Her gimmick, as a heel, was that of a martial artist who had nothing but contempt for pro wrestling, considering herself far above all others. She claimed that she could beat even the biggest of stars in mere seconds. Even her training had been somewhat different. She'd actually gone to train in the New Japan Dojo under Katetsu Yamamoto and Yoshiaki Fujiwara, where she'd spar with the men. The new promotion, LLPW, would see Kandori be joined by Rumi Kazama, a kickboxer in her high school days and the new company's president, as well as a fresh out of retirement Norio Tateno, the other half of the Jumping Bomb Angels. For this relatively new company, the Dream Slam would be a huge night indeed, as we'll see. After all, while AJW were keen to be separate from these new rival companies at first, things would change here in the early 90s. The Joshi companies, old and new, would start to work together. Part of this was perhaps due to a bit of a downturn in the business following the retirement of the Crush Gals and all of that. It became clear that these companies would be stronger if they worked together. That, and in many ways, AJW was the mother company. There would be no JWP or LLPW without them. And a 25th anniversary celebration for the mother company would certainly feel very incomplete without the wrestlers who are now representing these other promotions. 1992 was where the cross-promotional antics really started kicking off, with the companies combining for some incredible cards. The Dream Rush 92 card from 26 November 1992 was a major highlight, particularly for the 2 out of 3 Falls tag team main event. The top teams of both All Japan Women and JWP would duke it out for the tag team titles in one of, quite simply, the greatest tag bouts there has ever been. AJW's Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada were one half, JWP's Dynamite Kansai and Mayumi Ozaki were the other. Together they produced a contest that would add to the legends of all 4 wrestlers, and it certainly helped to make the JWP team of Kansai and Ozaki, both of whom had been largely trained up by the newer company, into major Joshi stars. With a match like this being so utterly incredible, what if you tried to do a huge card that was essentially filled with nothing but huge matches like this one? The trio of AJW, JWP and LLPW would all come together to make up the majority of the Dream Slam card, which would be almost totally filled with inter-promotional bouts. However, there is one other promotion to add to the mix, one that tends to do things a little bit differently, and that would be Atsushi Onita's FMW. The hardcore alternative, the extreme folks who like to do all the big matches with fire and barbed wire and great big explosions and so on. FMW may not need too much of an introduction, but they also do things differently by actually having a women's division. There aren't many companies in Puro at all where men and women wrestle on the same card, but FMW was one of them. Not only that, the women aren't just off in the sidelines, they're amongst the biggest stars. And while FMW and the Joshi companies don't usually do much in the way of business with each other, the Dream Slam is going to be an exception. There is, after all, a bit of storyline potential here. FMW's women's division contains a good few strong wrestlers, but 2 are undoubtedly at the top of it, Megumi Kudo and Combat Toyoda. The funny thing is that both Kudo and Toyoda were products of the AJW dojo, starting out in 1986. They were seen to have potential early on, but in such a fast-moving promotion, they both ended up falling by the wayside, and Zenjo released them in 1988. With AJW still seen as the only big game in town back then, Kudo and Toyoda left wrestling behind for a couple of years, until FMW came along and started to look into fill up a women's division. The faster Kudo and stronger Toyoda quickly became shining stars. They may not be as technically gifted as the best of AJW, but they're certainly willing to fight and take part in hardcore bouts. Megumi Kudo in particular is one of the biggest stars in FMW's history, male or female. And well, this return to All Japan Women as the stars of FMW has the makings of being a pretty good main event, with the top two FMW stars going against AJW's top team, Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada, two aces who are as AJW can possibly be. This is just one match, of course, in a card that will feature many. When you look at the whole card, particularly at the home team, the amount of talent on show is quite simply staggering. There are a good few people who've been around a while, of course, but many of AJW's biggest and best stars have come through in the last few years, out of the dojo. For a reason as to why AJW's level of talent was so phenomenal, you need look no further than the woman in charge of said dojo, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, Rimi Jaguar Yokota. In a career lasting from 1977 to 1986, Jaguar Yokota achieved so much, ridiculously ahead of her time, an innovator, a complete wrestler, one of the greatest technicians there's ever been. She was a phenom, a once-in-a-lifetime sort of talent that you just don't see every day, and she did all of this in the ring before the age of 24 when she retired. But her achievements in the ring would be matched or even topped by what she did as a trainer. Just take one look at the talent she produced. Manami Toyota, Aja Kon, Toshio Yamada, Kyoko and Takako Inoue, Megumi Kudo and many more were trained by Yokota. And if it wasn't for that, well, this show probably doesn't happen. Jaguar Yokota trained up an entire golden generation, and she has a big part to play in the outrageous standard of early mid-90s Joshi. The show has most of the card largely set up by the time February comes along, with a few little changes to come here and there. One of the biggest announcements is the return of Chigusa Nagayo. The most popular women's wrestler of all time is returning to the ring after spending some time as an actress, mostly taking the lead in a play and later film about her called Rin Rin Rin, the Champion Belt of Tears. Nagayo was initially set to face fellow AJW wrestler Bull Nakano in an exhibition, but the match soon changed to an interpromotional one against JWP representative and old rival Devil Masami. Megumi Kudo's role on the card also changes. It appears as though initially she would have faced AJW's champion, Aja Kon, but the outcome couldn't be agreed on. Therefore we get the tag match with Toyoda against Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada instead. There will be a slight representation for Lucha Libre promotion EMLL, who have a long-standing agreement with Senjo, and there will be a martial arts match with Round Rules on the card too, featuring Bat Yoshinaga. While most of the best wrestlers on the roster will be present and correct here, it is important to know that one of AJW's strongest up-and-comers, Mariko Yoshida, will miss the show thanks to an injury. AJW are doing everything they can to fill up the 17,000-seat Yokohama Arena for the show, with the simple aim of producing their biggest card ever, beating the likes of Chigusa Nagayo's retirement in 1989. By the end of February, it very much looks like they're going to pull it off. As we get into the final couple of weeks before the big show, we do get another rather unfortunate change. AJW's top gaijin, Debbie Malenko, suffers a terrible broken leg in a match on March the 11th after a freak accident when catching Manami Toyota on a dive. She will miss the Dream Slam and unfortunately, the injury will prove to be a career ender. Kaoru Ito will replace her on the card, tagging with Saki Hasegawa against JWP's Plum Mariko and Hikari Fukuoka. There will also be a ceremony on the card featuring a great deal of past stars. The likes of Lioness Asuka, Dump Matsumoto, Jaguar Yokota and Norio Tateno will be present, as well as some of the original big stars of the promotion like Nancy Kumi and Much Fumike. There are only a couple of notable omissions. Jackie Sato will not be there due to existing heat between her and AJW, and Itsuki Yamazaki of the Jumping Bomb Angels can't make the flight over from New York. With this being an interpromotional card, there isn't an awful lot in the way of angles. The big press conference for the show sees most of the wrestlers talking up their matches and opponents in a sports-like manner, although there is one exception here. The build-up for the match between Akira Hokuto and Shinobu Kandori results in a lot of heated discussion, a shoe being thrown, and both wrestlers having to be restrained. An appropriate angle perhaps for a match which will see one of Joshi's greatest representatives taking on someone who has little but scorn for traditional professional wrestling. And with all this gone through, well, it's time to get into the big card itself. Once again, it's 5 hours long and there's 11 matches to go through, so there's a lot to take on. As is often the case with Puro cards, we're going to be seeing a lot of tag matches, and this first bout promises to be a good opener. The AJW team of Kaoru Ito and Saki Hasegawa goes up against JWP's Plum Mariko and Hikari Fukuoka. 4 very good wrestlers indeed. This match certainly promises to be a speedy one. Saki Hasegawa in particular is fast as anything and a hot prospect. Plum Mariko is noted for combining fast speed with highly technical submissions, and Hikari Fukuoka is probably most famous for her phenomenal moonsault double stomp. The Jaguar Yokota trained Kaoru Ito rounds things off simply by being a tough customer. Hopefully this should kick things off pretty nicely. And yes, this is a magnificent opener. Everyone has a chance to shine in this incredibly fast tag bout. The variety of moves on display is really something, and the speed is off the scale. There's quite a lot of highlights here. Obviously you do get some nice aerial moves, like a picture-perfect corkscrew senton from Ito and a wonderful moonsault from Fukuoka, but there's a fair bit more than that. Plum Mariko does get a chance to show off some of her submission skills, with rolling knee bars and, of course, her signature and innovated stretch plum. There's the brilliant moment when Hasegawa hits 5 textbook double arm suplexes in a row on Mariko, and there's a whole lot of fire with all 4 wrestlers leaving everything, determined to beat the other team at all costs. It certainly packs an awful lot of action into a little over 15 minutes, not letting up at any time. The finish sees JWP pick up the win, with Ito and Fukuoka fighting on the outside. Mariko catches Hasegawa on the top rope, executing a Hurricane Rana and holding on for the 3 count, putting JWP on the board. This opening alone got a 4¼ star rating from Old Meltzer, and it's just about one of the hottest tag openers you'll find on any 90s Puro supercard. Of course, we do need a little about these wrestlers and how their careers would pan out. Hikari Fukuoka would be a constant in JWP through the whole of the 1990s and would just get better and better. She'd be one of the company's best later in the decade and, well, of course there's that finisher. She retired in 1999, although she does appear now and again in Battle Royals. Kaoru Ito would have a much longer career. Indeed, she's pretty much still going today, at the age of 50, and she even dabbled a little in MMA. Saki Hasegawa was one of AJW's big prospects, as mentioned. She'd even be seen in a WWF ring, taking part in that match at Survivor Series 1995 with a whole host of other AJW stars. However, her career was unfortunately cut short in 1996. Just as she was on the verge of becoming a top star, injuries became too much for her, and she chose to retire early. And then, well, there's Plum Mariko. I've gone into the sad story of Plum before, of course. She was an amazing and quite unique wrestler, but injuries would have a terrible effect on her. She continued to wrestle even though said injuries should really have stopped her, and then tragically she would pass away in the ring on the 16th of August 1997 at the age of only 28, becoming the first pro-res wrestler to die as a result of an injury in a match. A terrible incident and a great shame. Up next, it's time for FMW to make their first appearance. The team of Crusher Maidamari and Shark Tsuchiya certainly look mean enough, what with their face paint and so on. Hell, they wouldn't have looked out of place in Dump's atrocious alliance. They'll face the home team of Sami Numata and a Gaijin wrestler, Terry Power, who had a background in bodybuilding and looks appropriately strong. At this point, Americans may have seen her in the rather short-lived LPWA, where she'd held the singles belt at the promotion's closing. Naturally, this quartet has a bit of a tough act to follow considering the high quality and the heat of the opener, and perhaps it's not too surprising that they don't get up to that level. So yeah, this is one of the weaker matches on the whole Dream Sam card. Not that it's terrible, but it's just not quite up to everything else. It's a shorter match, and naturally, seeing as it's the FMW duo, there's lots of brawling. Maida Mari and Tsuchiya are certainly going to mostly be punching and healing it up, although Shark does do a couple of power moves. Terry Power also gets in a good few dry slaps, and there's a bit of fire from Numata. But still, this match does get a bit messy here and there. There are some rather disappointing botches, including one on a face crusher that kinda brings everything to a standstill for a moment. The finish sees Crusher and Terry brawl, leaving Numata at Shark's mercy. She survives for a little while, but ultimately succumbs to a powerbomb. AJW still don't have a win on their own card, and the FMW women stand tall. It's a pretty average match. The brawling isn't too bad, but Numata appears to be quite green still, and Terry Power doesn't do an awful lot. Mind you, she does appear to be working with one arm only due to injury, and that undoubtedly limited her. Not exactly an essential watch, although not awful. Sami Numata also wrestled as Numachi, and she did at one point wear a hard hat. She didn't really get beyond the mid-card, only wrestling from 1990 to 1994. Maida Mari and Tsuchiya both had solid careers, spent mostly in FMW, and both would hold the women's title, although Shark wrestled a lot longer and is probably better known overall, mainly for being one of Megumi Kudo's toughest opponents. And of course, Terry Power is the wrestler here people are most likely to know, because a few years later, and looking rather different, she'd be hired by WWF. Terry Power became Tori. She was initially presented as an obsessive fan of sables, and after that she did mostly hang around for a couple of years, although she was part of Heel DX at one point. Oh, and she was Kane's girlfriend for a time before turning and hooking up with X-Pac. And who could forget the mysterious Black Ninja? In all honesty, Tori never really seemed to fit in. Mind you, she did have that really freaking cool alley-oop plex that she did. She left in 2001 under something of a cloud, and quit wrestling soon after to pursue a career in yoga. Up next, we have a little appearance from EMLL. Esther Moreno, who wrestles under Ultima Tigrita, will team with Kaoru Maeda against the heel AJW team of Tomoko Watanabe and Mima Shimoda. Once again, this promises to be another pretty high-octane bout, while also perhaps having a bit more contrast than the previous two. And it proves to be that way, with another nice little gem of a match. Naturally, the EMLL team goes all out with the high flying. There's plenty of big arm drags, big springboards and big dives whenever they get the opportunity, while the AJW team try mostly to ground them. The more powerful Watanabe tends to go for submissions, while the utterly brilliant Shimoda, who'd already been around for a few years by this point, can pretty much do everything. She can fly too, and she certainly proves that, but she's also a pretty vicious heel brawler. Generally, both teams play off very nicely, and the match is another exciting one. There perhaps isn't too much here in the way of psychology and what have you, but there's certainly a lot of action and entertainment. Again, however, it's the outsider team who managed to sort out the victory. With Toguro and Shimoda brawling on the outside, Watanabe seems to have an edge on Kaoru, but again, a mistake is made, and Kaoru manages to wrap Tomoko up in a La Magistral cradle to get the free count, and leave All Japan women still thoroughly winless. A really good little match, mind you. Esther Moreno had a long career, mostly in Mexico, and is generally pretty underrated. She switched from EMLL to AAA not too long after this, and wrestled all over the place, only retiring in September of last year. Kaoru Maeda would be most famous when simply called Kaoru, working pretty high on the card a few years down the line for Gaia. She's still working today, as are the other two wrestlers. Watanabe would always be a very capable hand indeed, usually working pretty high up the card, while Mima Shimoda, well, she's a legend. Already well known for her Tokyo Sweethearts team with Manami Toyota, she turned heel and formed the almighty Las Cachorras Orientales, simply known as LCO, or the Oriental Bitches, with Etsuko Mita, who we'll see in the next match, and briefly Akira Hakuto. LCO would be one of the great Joshi tag teams all over the place, and Shimoda would prove herself to be utterly capable in just about any style of wrestling going anywhere in the world. A truly exceptional hand. Our next match sees the aforementioned Etsuko Mita teaming up with Suzuka Minami, previously in a tag team with Akira Hakuto called the Marine Wolves, going against LLPW representatives Rumi Kazama and Miki Honda. Kazama, as mentioned, was one of the founding wrestlers behind LLPW, while Miki Honda has a bit of experience and even made a brief appearance in WCW circa 1991. With LLPW being the new promotion on the block, they naturally go into this match as the underdogs, particularly against two very good wrestlers with pretty well established tag team pedigrees, and that's as good a story as any to go into this match. We do have a bit of a change of pace here, as you might expect from the fourth match in. This one goes a bit slower, and indeed a bit longer, with the bout lasting a little over 20 minutes. Naturally, it's still excellent. Everyone has a solid role to play in this one. On the LLPW side, Kazama uses her kickboxing background to great effect with some pretty effective kicks, while Miki Honda, pretty obscure name nowadays, is really good, sells very well, and does a great job of being the match's Ricky Morton. Etsuko Mita is incredibly fiery and, much like her usual partner Mima Shimoda, is great at pretty much everything from brawling and healing to technical skills, and Suzuka Minami is an excellent and underrated wrestler. Technically marvellous, and everything she does looks glorious. There's many fabulous moments here, from a stunning super electric chair drop, pulverising double drop kicks from the top, and a few cracking suplexes and powerbombs. But the match does become a real story of two great teams cancelling out the other, one that's going to require a team taking just the slightest bit of advantage in order to get the victory. In the end, after 22 brilliant minutes, Mita makes the error. She runs Kazama to the ropes, but right into Minami, knocking her off the apron. Kazama reacts fast, going behind Mita and executing a picture-perfect German suplex for the 3 count and a huge upset victory for the new promotion. A really freaking good match, this one. While there's a lot of tags on this card, and a lot of them are justifiably famous, this is a pretty special bout too, and worthy of attention. As mentioned before, Etsuko Mita would have a huge team with Mima Shimoda as the LCO. They'd wreak absolute havoc in AJW, not to mention later on in promotions like Arjacon's Arcean, and they're very much worth seeking out. Suzuka Minami was a brilliant hand who worked high on the card and was loyal to AJW, starting in 1985, retiring in 1995 in the usual fashion, and never entering the ring again. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of info on Miki Honda, but she would go on to win the AJW tag titles and would have a decent career. Rumi Kazama would continue to be active both as a wrestler and as LLPW's president for years to come, before fully retiring in 2012, opening a restaurant, and also starting a YouTube channel where she interviewed fellow pro wrestlers. Sadly, however, Rumi Kazama passed away suddenly in September of 2021 at the age of 55. Kazama was never at the top of any promotion that she worked in, but she was an excellent talent and ambassador for Joshi. A very sad loss. Okay, we'll keep this one brief. The next match isn't a wrestling match, but an actual shoot fight featuring AJW's martial arts champion, that Yoshinaga, against an American boxer named Susan Howard. It's a bit of a weird one, of course. 3 5-minute rounds under kickboxing rules, and it all gets rather sloppy and gassy as you might expect it to. Not exactly much special to speak of, although the whole Bat Yoshinaga and the Martial Arts Championship is an odd sort of blur between gimmick and shoot. Yoshinaga carried this belt for a whole chunk of her time in AJW and never lost it, although her background in martial arts appears to be a bit hazy. As a wrestler, she certainly wasn't the best, although she did have a place in tag matches. As far as Susan Howard goes, well, I believe that these days she owns a boxing club back in the States and has had a good few pro fights. Anyway, this is most definitely the weakest part of the whole card, and the one thing that you should probably skip over unless you really want to see some quite sloppy fighting. At this moment, we do get a quick little ceremony to celebrate AJW's 25th anniversary, complete with lots of the company's past stars coming out to the ring for introductions and promos alongside the Matsunaga brothers. There's plenty of great names from all over the company's history, including lots of folks that you may well recognise, Lioness Asuka, Dump Matsumoto, Norio Tateno, just to name a few. One of those nice little fins, really, and the sort of fin that befits a show like this one. There's a couple of names that are missing for various reasons, of course, but we did go into that a little before the show. Another two names who you may well expect to see in this win laughing and smiling along with everyone else are Chigusa Nagayo and Devil Masami, but they've got a good reason not to be a part of this ceremony, seeing as they're about to face off against each other in a big bout. Let's take a look at that now. It's time for our first singles match of the night, and it's nothing less than the in-ring return of the most popular star in the history of Joshi Pro Res, Chigusa Nagayo. She'd spent a few years out after her official retirement in 1989, mostly in front of a camera, starring in a movie and play about her life and career, but now she's back, at least for these glorious and special events. Or so it seems. Chigusa Nagayo certainly doesn't have an easy return. She's going up against not just one of her greatest rivals, but another one of the great names of Joshi, Devil Masami. Masami initially retired in 1987, per AJW tradition, but she soon decided that she didn't want to stay out of the ring, and so she became a part of JWP in order to continue a glorious career that had started in 1978. 15 years later, she continues to be one of Joshi's top stars. Indeed, in 1993, she is still considered to be amongst the world's very best wrestlers, regardless of gender. Devil Summer was already considered to be Hall of Fame material. Return matches don't get much tougher than this one, which is being rightly billed by the company as a super fight. So what do we get here? Well, we get a pretty bloody good match, naturally. Chigusa Nagayo may have been out of the ring for 4 years, but she doesn't appear to have lost a step. She's still got the same great technical and striking ability, and she's one of the best sellers in the game too. Devil Masami, as mentioned, was a top wrestler in 1993 and, yeah, she is just wonderful to watch. Visually, she's one of the most charismatic and expressive wrestlers in the whole history of Joshi, and all of that is very much on display, and her skill is right up there. Naturally, the pair work a bit slower than what we've seen on the card. It's a slow burner, a seeming exhibition that quickly turns into a continuation of a long rivalry, and a very hot crowd indeed for the whole of the match. There's a lot of great technical wrestling, and also a lot of nice little details to be found, the sort of match that benefits from re-watching. Now of course, in Pro Res it's usually common for a returning wrestler, no matter how famous, to end up on their back in their comeback. And sure enough, the finish sees Nagayo getting caught by Masami on the turnbuckle and punished severely. She survives for a time, kicking out of 3 finishing Masami powerbombs, but Devil Summer finally poleaxes her with a brutal Northern Light suplex from the top. Both wrestlers are interviewed together in the post-match, full of smiles and respect. I feel like this match is a bit overshadowed compared to some of the others on the card, particularly the one that's going to follow on immediately, but it's still another great match from the Dream Slam. These two wrestlers have a very high standard, and they sure as hell didn't disappoint. Devil Masami would continue to be a big part of Joshi for many more years, and she would also win the WCW Women's title in 1997. She largely spent most of her time in Gaia, Japan from 1995, which we'll talk more about very shortly, before retiring in 2008 after 30 years in the business, a member of both the AJW Hall of Fame and Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. Chigusa Nagayo's return match was initially presented as a one-off, but she would continue to appear sporadically and, sure enough, she would fully return to the business in 1995 at the head of a new promotion named Gaia Japan. Gaia was a great promotion, and in the aftermath of the implosion of AJW in the late 90s, Gaia would become the top promotion in Joshi's more fragmented world. Nagayo would be a part of that both in and out of the ring, with many big angles, not least amongst them the eventual reuniting of, and feud between, the Crush Gals with Lioness Asuka. Nagayo officially retired from full-time in 2005, but still makes occasional exhibition appearances, and is now at the head of a Joshi company called Marvelous. She remains unquestionably the biggest star in the history of Joshi Pro Res, and perhaps in the whole history of women's wrestling. Now, I don't want to big up this next match too much, but it's one of the 2 matches on this card that Dave Meltzer awarded 5 whole stars to, so you know, no biggie. It's another clash between AJW and JWP, featuring 4 absolute top-level stars. The AJW team of Kyoko and Takako Inoue, otherwise known as the Double Inoues, against the JWP team of Cutie Suzuki and Mayumi Ozaki. The JWP team were the company's reigning tag champs at the time, and Ozaki already had some tag classics against AJW under her belt, those stunning matches teaming with Dynamite Kansai against Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada during the previous year. A lot of the big matches on this card have special names. This one is called Shining Stars, and that seems pretty appropriate. Everything's just about set here for something amazing, and this match is most certainly going to provide. So, wow. This match is like the openers, only it's on steroids and with an incredibly heated crowd. All four wrestlers take part in an absolutely amazing contest. The action is so rapid and fluid here, it just seems, well, years ahead of anything else. And yet this isn't just a spot fest. There's a lot of psychology and story going on, particularly in the context of the whole card, with AJW still yet to pick up their first win. It's hard to put into words just how good this quartet is. Kyoko Inoue and Mayumi Ozaki in particular are virtually peerless, and responsible for a fair few of the great moments, whether it's some of Ozaki's blinding suplexes, or Kyoko's stunning near 40 rotation giant swing on Suzuki. Don't underrate the other two though. Takako is just about as good, and far too underrated when compared to some of the other greats of 90s Joshi. As for Cutie Suzuki, it's often said that her skill is lesser when compared to other greats, considering her status on the card, but really this is wildly overstated. She's bloody good as well. The desperation and aggression just gets wilder and wilder, particularly when the JWP team combine for 5 double stomps on Kyoko, anything to keep her down, and at no point does the level sag. They just do not put a foot wrong here, at all. The last stretch action between Kyoko and Ozaki is really something special, and at last the edge goes to the AJW team. The Inoues combine for an assisted Niagara driver, and with Suzuki just about thwarted from another last-ditch break, the move's enough for the 3 count. AJW are on the board at last, and the contest itself is, well, out of this world. One of the best Joshi tags of the 90s, and a match that you should go ahead and watch right this instant. All of the participants in this match have achieved legendary status, of course. The Double Inoue's team still continues to this day with appearances here and there, although Kyoko Inoue would achieve more in the way of singles success, especially in 1995, when she was quite arguably the best wrestler of the whole year, male or female. She was something else. Don't underestimate Takako though, who had her own part to play in some amazing events. Cutie Suzuki largely stayed loyal to JWP, while also being one of the company's crossover stars, and retired from the ring in 1998, although she did return for a one-off match in 2013. Mayumi Ozaki has wrestled all over the shop in all sorts of styles, from the most technical bouts to some of the most hardcore, and she's done more than enough to warrant a status as one of Joshi's greatest. Both Kyoko Inoue and Mayumi Ozaki would also form their own promotions. Kyoko founded Neo Ladies, and Ozaki created Oz Academy. The 8th match on the card certainly features 2 teams of seriously tough wrestlers going at it. On the AJW side, we have a team that's as dominant as it gets, Aja Kong and Bull Nakano. Nakano is serious enough, what with that utterly unique look and propensity for violence, but Aja Kong is the complete wrestling monster, and she's the queen of the company, the reigning and dominant WWWA champion. That said, the LLPW team isn't any kind of slouch. Eagle Sawai and Harley Saito are both thoroughly seasoned veterans. Sawai's got power to match Aja Kong, and Saito's got the strikes and the heart. Can the new promotion upset the odds once again? Now, of course, this match did have a very tough act to follow after the previous bout, and the crowd are perhaps a bit noticeably quiet for it, but it's still a good one, albeit one that's more of a straight-out fight than a technical showcase, as you might expect. You still naturally get lots of power moves, especially from the almighty Kon, and most of them are pretty savage, but you do get a couple of nice bits with the weapons, particularly when Nakano brings her signature nunchucks in, only to find that Saito can get pretty flashy with them too. The LLPW team do have strong highlights and even force these two titans into doing things you wouldn't normally see them do. Aja Khan executing a plunger is certainly something, and most definitely awesome. Eagle Sawai gets some good stuff in. She's by far the least known worker in this match, but Khan puts her over pretty strong, with Sawai getting the power advantage over her in several exchanges, something that almost nobody did. But eventually, in this case, the LLPW team are quite overmatched. Saito gets decimated by Aja Khan with two thoroughly vicious Urakens, and even though Sawai is able to break up the pin following Nakano's first guillotine leg drop, she's not around to break up after a devastating, twisting somersault leg drop. The AJW team get the win that you would expect, but the LLPW team did put on a great showing, and there's a lot of respect shown at the end of the match, with Nakano even handing over the nunchucks to Saito. While this match isn't necessarily a highlight bout on a card that's this good, it certainly would be on plenty of other cards. A perfectly good match for something that's mostly a bit of a brawl. Both Eagle Sawai and Harley Saito could be found in plenty of promotions over the course of their careers, generally roaming free. They would both win LLPW's main singles title several times, along with plenty of other titles. Sawai retired in 2007 and Saito in 2012, although sadly Harley Saito passed away in December of 2016 due to cancer at the age of 49. Bull Nakano would continue wrestling until 1997. She had quite a wild run that also contained a bit of time in the WWF and her feud with Alundra Blaze over the women's title, which was one of the few definite highlights of the promotion's 1995. She's done all sorts of things after wrestling, including becoming a professional golfer, and nowadays she has a YouTube channel where she interviews fellow Joshi wrestlers and legends. Aja Khan would continue to be dominant, holding the main WWWA Championship for 850 days, a reign second only to Bull Nakano's previous 1057-day stint with the belt. Indeed, the best was yet to come, especially when her epic feud with Manami Toyota really got going. After AJW, she'd form her own promotion by the name of Arceon. One of the best Joshi wrestlers and monsters of all time, she's still very much going to this day. Now, believe it or not, for a show that's over 5 hours long, we've actually only got 3 matches to go. Despite the length, this is a show that absolutely flies by. Part of that is down to the speed of the action, of course, not to mention the high quality, but this version of the show does have a pretty no-frills presentation. You get pre- and post-match interviews, and the match footage doesn't have entrances, just the ring announcer intros. The action basically does the talking, although that hardly matters when it's so good. Anyway, it's time for another singles match. We've got one of the great aces of JWP, Dynamite Kansai, against the excellent and very much legit Yumiko Hotta, one of AJW's great rising stars who's going to become a major player very soon. These two should be a very good match for each other, and seeing as this is the main AJW vs JWP bout on the card, there's a lot of bragging rights at stake. Jeez, this is one seriously stiff bout. In a good way, of course. Dynamite Kansai and Yumiko Hotta are two of the best kickers in the whole of the business, and they absolutely bring the pain to each other to a point that's going to make just about anyone cringe. Both wrestlers get moments where it's teased that they've knocked out the other, and they seem to pretty much just lay everything in. So if you enjoy big old head kicks, then you've most certainly come to the right place. Two ass kickers like this pair quite simply complement each other perfectly, and once again it feels like the only way that anyone's going to get the win is through one simple little mistake. After all, even beyond the kicks they throw their best at each other, pile drivers, power bombs, backdrops, even a top rope straightjacket suplex, all not enough to get the job done. The finish sees Hotta try to take Kansai's head off with another roundhouse, but Kansai dodges, hits one of her own, and then positions Hotta on her shoulders for a big splash mountain to get the win. It is a bit odd as Hotta does appear to actually kick out before the 3, but the finish is called anyway. Even with that little botch in mind, this is just another fantastic match on the card, and another match that provides something a bit different to what we've already seen on the card. The range of this show is something else, and absolutely everyone's giving their very best. There's a big show of respect between these two at the end, which is fair enough considering that they've just taken some serious lumps out of each other. Yumiko Hotta would continue to become more of an ass kicker, adding a lot more mixed martial arts to her gimmick from 1994 onwards, and eventually becoming a multiple-time WWWA Women's Champion. She's still an active wrestler today and can be found in various indie Joshi promotions such as Assemble and Seedlinin'. Dynamite Kansai would continue to be awesome too. That inevitable war with Aja Khan, when it happened, sure was a good one. She eventually moved from JWP to Gaia and the Indies in the 2000s, mainly in Forever tag partner Mayo Miyazaki's Oz Academy, before retiring in 2016. Both Hotta and Kansai, like many wrestlers on this card, are unquestionable Joshi Pro-Res legends who you ought to check out plenty more matches of, if you haven't previously. Up next, it's the semi-main, and it's the match with a fair bit of heat behind it. If you recall back to the pre-show, you'll remember that Akira Hokuto and Shinobu Kandori had to be pulled apart at the press conference where everyone else was generally being respectful. This is a match with a tailor-made story. Akira Hokuto, the Dangerous Queen, is Miss AJW. Hell, she's Miss Joshi Pro-Res, flashy, charismatic, and talented beyond description. While Hokuto is Joshi to the core, LLPW's Shinobu Kandori has boasted of her legit shooter background and her contempt for pure pro wrestlers. For her, someone like Akira Hokuto represents all that she dislikes. It's only natural that this match is going to get quite heated and possibly even quite violent. Indeed, even though this isn't the last match of the night, the antics at the press conference really made this a seller on the card. It earned the Dream Slammer spot on the front cover of Weekly Pro Wrestling, something that a Joshi promotion almost never got, and that was a couple of days before the event. Now, for most matches I've generally gone with a broader summary. That seemed best, especially as there's quite a lot of bouts and the action so quick they probably wouldn't be best served by such a blow-by-blow approach. Hokuto vs Kandori, however, well, this one needs the full, detailed blow-by-blow account. Blow by blow is appropriate, seeing as Hokuto starts this match by punching Kandori square in the face, sending her out of the ring. Hokuto then gets on the house mic and asks Kandori if that's all she's got, but Kandori soon responds with slaps and lariats, and then locking an armbar on Hokuto who's in the ropes but is hurt bad by it, sending her out of the ring and selling as if Kandori just ripped her shoulder out of its socket. This is one of the main bits of psychology here. As a legit shooter, Kandori's submissions are treated like death moves, and Hokuto must avoid them at all costs. Once Hokuto re-enters the ring, the fighting continues. It's incredibly heated and stiff, much like the previous match. Kandori continues to attempt submissions after getting the better of exchanges, although Hokuto also has a go. However, hers are notably not as effective as Kandori's. Then comes another big moment. The fight spills to the outside, and Hokuto tries to execute a tombstone on the announcer's table. However, Kandori reverses and hits a dangerous tombstone of her own. You can even see the freaking crack in the table, and these ones don't have much give. We're just a few minutes in, and the LLPW star has a big advantage. The result of this is that Hokuto comes back with a huge, Muta-scale break-in Crimson Mask. She's drenched in blood. In the ring, Kandori tries to punch and kick Hokuto out of existence, with the drama already off the charts. However, Hokuto is able to reverse with a lariat, and then it's her turn to pummel Kandori. She takes her out of the ring and all the way into the audience, blasting her into the rails repeatedly and showing just how hard and dirty she can fight. When Kandori eventually comes back to the ring, she too has been bloodied up. Not as badly as Hokuto, but still pretty nasty. The crowd are expectedly loud as hell for all of this. The match continues, of course. Both continue to simply fight each other, and even if there's not a whole lot of wrestling moves, the storytelling is something else. Kandori hits a plancha on the outside, followed by a backdrop, and Hokuto only just survives a rear naked choke attempt. Hokuto is able to reply with slaps and then hits one of her legendary short pile drivers. Kandori's submissions remain a serious threat, and she can take advantage of any slight mistake to apply one. However, Hokuto continues to find the ropes. Hokuto knocks Kandori down once more, hits one splash off the top rope, but lands on Kandori's feet when she goes for a second. There is absolutely nothing between these two as Kandori hits a powerbomb for a big near fall. Hokuto gets her own near fall from a dragon suplex, but then gets caught going to the top. Kandori pulls her off and twirls her around, ultimately resulting in a sleeper. It's the most tense submission yet, and again, using all of her energy, Hokuto manages to find the ropes. We're getting close to the finish, and there's no telling who's going to come out on top. Hokuto reverses an Irish whip and hits a powerbomb of her own for another near fall. The fighting again goes to the outside with Kandori reeling, amazingly so far in and with so much damage. Hokuto nails a brilliant tope con hilo off the ropes, followed by a plancha from the top rope. Does she finally have the crucial advantage? Back in the ring, Hokuto calls for her signature Northern Lights bomb, but Kandori reverses again, attempting a cross arm breaker. Another very close call indeed. Kandori continues to desperately attempt submissions, but gets caught. Hokuto hits a backdrop hold for a near fall. Finally, Hokuto is able to nail her finisher, blasting Kandori with the Northern Lights bomb, and Kandori kicks out. Everyone is in shock. Just about nobody kicks out of the Northern Lights bomb. Hokuto goes for it again, but Kandori reverses and hits the Northern Lights bomb of her own. However, Hokuto also kicks out. They have hit each other with the absolute best that they've got, and it wasn't enough. At this stage, utterly exhausted, Hokuto and Kandori have nothing but fists. They blast each other with haymakers, throwing all the energy they have left into them. On the third go, they both hit each other at the same time, laying each other out. But Hokuto just has enough energy to crawl over Kandori's body and get the 3 count. It's a different sort of finish, but the match is over, and perhaps something like this was the only way that it could finish. There's no respect or handshake either. Kandori eventually storms out, while Hokuto says that she will never lose to a judo wannabe. Even after such a war, this most certainly isn't over by a long shot. Whew. Well, this match is something else. 30 minutes of sheer hell. Even on such a brilliant card, one that's filled from top to bottom with the most wonderful action, this bout was a level beyond. It was the match that absolutely everybody was talking about afterwards. It had been a long time since Joshi had seen such a bloody and hateful war, perhaps not since the peak days of Chigusa, Nagayo and Dump Matsumoto. This felt like a legitimate fight, not a technical showcase by any means, but the storytelling and drama was just unreal. It quite rightly received a 5-star rating from The Observer, and quickly became a match that you simply had to see. There really aren't too many matches like this one, and yeah, it has to go down as one of the greatest bouts of all time. In a career filled with masterpieces, it's quite possibly Akira Hokuto's finest hour, and Shinobu Kandori was more than a match for her on this night. Both are legends, of course. Even without this match that would be the case, and to go through their career achievements would take a long frickin' time. But this is quite possibly the peak, not just of their respective careers, but maybe of Joshi Pro Res. You might well have forgotten that there is still one match to go, but it is, indeed, now time for the main event. The top face team in AJW, Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada, are going up against the big FMW duo, Megumi Kudo and Combat Toyoda, the former AJW hopefuls who would blossom to become stars in the new alternative promotion. There's certainly a lot of styles on offer: the brawling of Toyoda, the heart of Kudo, Yamada's striking, and Toyota's aerial assaults. All of that's going to be on display. That said, you hardly envy them. You wouldn't envy anybody who has to follow the match that's just taken place that, in all honesty, most people thought of as the real main event. It's very much a Jericho and Triple H following Rock and Hogan at WrestleMania X8 type of deal, in other words. But even if Loren's still smeared in blood from the epic war that preceded it, you can be pretty damn sure that these two teams are going to put on a fine show. This match, perhaps understandably, tends to be overlooked on the Dream Slam card. It goes quite long at 28 minutes, the exhausted crowd are understandably subdued for a lot of it, and it had to follow Hakuto vs Kandori. All that said, this is still a pretty damn good bout. It's a little slow going at first, but the crowd do start to get pretty into it. Everyone certainly has a part to play in this one. You do get a bit of FMW type brawling, although there's no weapons or blood, and you certainly get some nice fire in the strikes from Yamada. But in the main, this match is the Manami Toyota show. She's typically incredible, being in Lurin for most of it, selling a terrific beating from Kudo and Toyota, and then going on the offensive with her amazing aerial skills. She's up there at the very top level of Joshi for a damn good reason. This is of course not to underrate everyone else in the match. Yamada is absolutely brilliant as well, and shouldn't be cast aside in favour of her partner. And while Kudo and Toyota aren't on the same skill level as this team, they're more than able to hold their own here. You do get some pretty nice moments from everyone in the match. Still, the final match of the night goes to the home team. After working from the bottom for most of the bout, Manami Toyota is finally able to seize an advantage, and with Toyota out of commission, she plants Kudo with the Japanese Ocean Cyclone Suplex to get the victory. Are there better tag matches on the card than this main event? Yes, but it is a good way to end the show, with Zenjo's top face team standing tall. Again, all four of these wrestlers are very much in the Legends bracket. Megumi Kudo and Combat Toyota would, of course, be better known as rivals than as a team, and they paired up for some of FMW's most famous bouts, particularly their final exploding barbed wire death match in 1996, just before Toyota's retirement. Kudo joined Toyota in retirement the following year, following another great barbed wire match with Shark Tsuchiya, and after FMW neither stepped foot in the ring again. Toshio Yamada, as mentioned, can sometimes get overlooked when compared to her main partner, despite the classics they wrestled both as a team and indeed against each other, but she's absolutely on the top level, an undoubted great when she retired in 2004. And Manami Toyota? Well, she ended up basically achieving everything in a 30-year career, wrestling around the world, winning title after title, having an all-time great year in 1995, and finally winding up in 2017 as one of the very greatest wrestlers Joshi has ever known. And with that, the Dream Slam is done. It kind of goes without saying that the show was a phenomenal success. The huge gate of 16,600 and the merchandise that was sold meant that All Japan Women earned a couple of $1 million simply on the night alone. But after the show absolutely knocked it out of the park, well, that would go way up. The Dream Slam was a huge talking point in all of Pro Res for months afterwards, earning AJW and Joshi as a whole a big chunk of mainstream attention and essentially being the beginning of another boom period. AJW and the other promotions would have a whopping increase in attendance and viewers thanks to the Dream Slam. The show itself became a hot product. AJW sold the video set of the supercard for the cool sum of around $150, but the price didn't matter as whenever they brought the videos to shows, they would sell out of them almost immediately. There was even a game to commemorate the event. Human Entertainment released Fire Pro's Joshi All-Star Dream Slam in 1993, one of the few Fire Pro games to have an official license. I think another thing that needs to be said about this Joshi boom in particular is while the action in companies like AJW was often always good, booms in the past were often accompanied with mainstream success and were often the result of mainstream success, with the Crush Gals releasing singles and so on. This was a boom pretty much entirely based around the quality of the company's wrestling, and that's different, and certainly in this case, better. There was a sequel to the Dream Slam that happened very quickly. In fact, Dream Slam 2 occurred only a couple of days later. While the second show isn't as well remembered as the first, it's still seen as a damn good one. You've got big singles bouts like Chigusa Nagayo taking on Bull Nakano, the FMW team of Kudo and Toyoda against the LCO, and a rematch between the amazing teams of Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada versus Dynamite Kansai and Mayumi Ozaki, another all-time classic that would earn 5 stars from The Observer. Speaking of The Observer, the first Dream Slam won the Sheet's year-end award for Major Card of the Year, which is, well, pretty obvious really. It goes without saying that the Dream Slam is one of the best supercards there's ever been. It's a 5-hour show where, honestly, the time flies by and you basically won't be bored for just about any portion of it. Even the martial arts bout can't exactly drag things down, a mere speck on a show that, otherwise, is essentially perfect. As a show on its own, it's an all-timer. And it's even better when you consider it as the beginning to a boom that would lead All Japan women all the way to the Tokyo Dome, a time when they had a countless amount of incredible matches along the way, and when they could put even the greatest wrestling promotions to shame. Bye for now. The last time we dove into the world of Joshi, we looked at the All-Star Dream Slam from 1993, an absolute belter of a card featuring top action from the beginning to the end, including several classic bouts. It's a special night for women's wrestling, and the first ever women's card to earn over $1 million just from the gate alone. And, well, it inspired All Japan women to try something even bigger. The next year, in November, Japan's oldest wrestling company, once again with the help of JWP, LLPW and FMW, not to mention others, would make their way to the Tokyo Dome for what remains the biggest women's wrestling show in history. Domu Superwoman Great War, Big Egg Wrestling Universe. Approximately 42,500 people made their way into the Dome for a quite staggering 23-match, 10-plus hour supercard that featured just about every major Joshi talent going, and lots else besides. From a tournament featuring the very best wrestlers in the world to the showcasing of legends and younger talents, from a few spots of kickboxing and amateur wrestling to a title match put on by the WWF, hell, there'd even be a men's match. It's often just a silly turn of phrase to say that a show's got everything, but in Big Egg Universe's case it absolutely does apply, and it's high time we had a look at this behemoth. Now obviously covering Big Egg Universe is a seriously intimidating task. Again, this is a 23-match show. It would be absolutely maniacal to try and cover every last second of it because, well, we'd be here for hours and hours. I'm usually long-winded, but there are limits. However, it is a show that has a big centrepiece, a massive story going in that was the main pull of the card, and that centrepiece is the V-Top 5-Star Tournament, a one-night spectacular featuring 8 of the top wrestlers from the big 3 Joshi promotions and FMW taking part, duking it out for a prize pot of 15 million yen and the honour of being the best Joshi wrestler in the world. Now usually when it comes to 1994, people would say that New Japan's Super J-Cup is the best one-night tournament going, perhaps the best one ever, and well, that's hardly an incorrect opinion. But the V-Top tournament is, at the very least, a contender. And so, while we'll certainly touch on all the various happenings on the card because obviously there's a lot to talk about, the tournament will be the main focus. So, let's get on with it. This is the Big Egg Wrestling Universe, the biggest event in the history of women's wrestling. You may well know a good bunch of the people who are going to be in this tournament. There's Aja Kon, Manami Toyota, Dynamite Kansai, Yumiko Hotta. Just that quartet alone represents a ridiculous amount of talent and a hell of a lot of popularity. All of them are all-time greats. But even at this time in the Joshi world, when things were going so well and the quality was so consistently off the scale, one name stands out above all, the woman who was, in a lot of people's eyes, the best wrestler in the world, male or female, Akira Hokuto. When we looked at the Dream Slam, we saw that ungodly war between Hokuto and the top star of Ladies Legends Pro Wrestling, Shinobu Kandori, a truly vicious, epic encounter that completely stole the show. And well, Hokuto's star has only shone brighter since then. Just through the rest of 1993 alone, her big singles bouts against the likes of Yumiko Hotta, Manami Toyota, Aja Kon and Mayumi Yazaki, not to mention another staggering battle against Kandori to round off the year, are beyond compare. Quite simply, in 1993 no one in the world, male or female, was on the level of the Dangerous Queen. Frankly, no one was even remotely close. Still, everyone knew that Hokuto had a weakness. It's something that kind of defined her career, really, and that was her propensity for getting injured. Hokuto essentially broke out big through injury. Back in 1987, early on in her Zenjo career, when she was still under her real name of Hisako Uno, the first fall of a tag titles match between the team of Uno and Hotta and Azure Nagahori and Yumi Ogura would see one of the most outrageous spots ever seen in wrestling up to that point. Ogura wins the first fall by pinning Uno after a freaking tombstone piledriver from the second rope. It was absolutely insane, and it broke Hisako Uno's neck. The spot itself isn't the craziest part though. That would probably be Hisako Uno continuing to work the entirety of the second and third falls, often quite literally holding her head in place and barely taking a half step backwards. Particularly nowadays, such a thing completely boggles the mind, but it sure was tough. Hisako Uno was out for 8 months following the match, but on her return the persona that defined her, the blonde hair, the masks, the sword, the new name that paid homage to Akira Maeda, gradually took hold. Still, Akira Hokuto would suffer plenty of other nasty injuries over the years, often during the course of bouts or just before major ones. But she would usually continue forward unless it was clearly impossible, and the amount of bandages that she'd often come to the ring with would earn her another nickname outside of Dangerous Queen, that being the Mummy. Alas, at the end of 1993, it looked as though all those injuries were going to come to a head. Following victory with Manami Toyota in the year-end tag team tournament, Hokuto announced that she intended to retire from professional wrestling in 1994, citing the injuries she'd suffered as the major reason. In something that casts a different sort of hue to the incredible 1993 she'd had, All Japan women did know about Hokuto's intentions to retire for most of the year. They certainly got as much from Hokuto as possible, knowing this. The plan initially was for Hokuto to work 3 bouts for AJW, the Yokohama Arena on March 27th, August 24th at Nippon Budokan, and then finally November 20th at the Dome. However, these weren't the only 3 matches that Hokuto would work. This was also around the time when she started working in Mexico for CMLL. Working as Reina Jabuki, which translates to Rainstorm, Hokuto naturally hit the ground running, had the Mexican press calling her the Michael Jordan of wrestling, and it didn't take long for her to move there and actually get married to Antonio Gomez Medina, better known as Mascara Magica. It did kind of become clear over the course of the year that Hokuto leaving wasn't so much full retirement as it was fully leaving for Mexico, but her marriage to Mascara Magica did end up being rather short-lived. Well before 1994 was out, they'd divorced, and Hokuto had moved back to Japan. And so, a month or so before the Dome show, a new storyline was set. Hokuto will compete in the V-Top tournament, and if she ends up winning it, then she will not retire. The lighter schedule had, it was said, done wonders for her conditioning, and she felt it possible that she could keep on going. This is most definitely the main storyline going into Big Egg Universe, although obviously there's a lot more to look at. The November the 20th Dome show itself was announced a few days before December 1993's St. Battle Final event, and it was certainly viewed as a risk. Despite the huge success of the Dream Slam, the Dome is obviously an altogether bigger matter. At the very least, it was going to have to be a huge interpromotional affair. A big part of the show was presenting it as a 40th anniversary celebration, 40 years since Mildred Burke's November 1954 tour of Japan, which tends to officially be regarded as the beginning of Joshi due to its huge success, although there was certainly women's wrestling in the country years before then. As the year went on, outside of the in-ring action, and as we got closer to the Dome, news items gradually came through about it, including some rather weird ones. Maybe we could have seen Tonya Harding at the Dome. That could have indeed been a thing. In March of 1994, AJW boss Takashi Matsunaga said that he was going to offer the now disgraced figure skater a $2 million contract to become a Zenjo wrestler, and Akira Hokuto even offered to train her. Obviously, this was when the whole Tonya and Nancy Kerrigan story was a giant news item, and this offer certainly set some tongues wagging, even outside of Japan. The idea of Tonya Harding wrestling in Japan most certainly made it to mainstream American news. Initially, the whole thing did appear to be a silly little publicity stunt, but as the weeks went on, it did become clear that some negotiations were taking place. According to the Matsumoto brothers, Harding's team were apparently demanding $2 million for one match at the Dome, a frankly astronomical and honestly ludicrous amount of money for a single shot, so who knows if that's even true. It is perhaps surprising just how long this story went for, but by the start of May it did eventually become clear that this wasn't going to happen. Shockingly enough, AJW and Tonya's team couldn't agree on the financials. A more accurate reason as to why this never had a chance of happening though, was that Tonya still had a quite staggering insurance policy on her legs from her figure skating days, as in millions of dollars. Tonya still held out hope for a return to her actual sport, and obviously those pins weren't worth risking for a wrestling show. They did try later on just to bring her in as a special guest, but that also didn't happen. That being said, even the whispers of it potentially happening were enough to warrant a huge amount of newspaper interest, such was the interest in the whole Tonya Harding story. It was, if nothing else, a successful publicity stunt, and you can probably chalk up a fair bit of its success to a name you're likely familiar with, Zenjo's head of PR and manager of talent, Rossi Agawa. As it is, Tonya Harding actually did get involved in one wrestling show. She appeared on a June 22nd Sandy Bar promoted show in Portland as the ring valet for Los Gringos Locos, the legendary team of Eddie Guerrero and Love Machine Art Bar. In other less outlandish happenings, the True Card gradually takes shape over the course of the year. Damn near anyone who's anyone in the current world of Joshi will be participating, not to mention a few legends. Jaguar Yokota, after retiring in 1985, will be making her official return to the ring, as will Lioness Asuka, who'd retired in 1989. Chigusa Nagayo will be there once again, although she now cuts a more heelish figure than before. She's at the head of something called Gaia that was formed at the end of August. At this stage, Gaia isn't very well understood by the Western press. The Observer considered it to be a totally worked new promotion operating inside of All Japan, when it would actually end up being a very real promotion indeed. Naturally, JWP, LLPW and FMW are all going to be involved in this show, but there's also the WWF involvement, which centres entirely around Bull Nakano and Alundra Blaze. Nakano and Blaze, the latter better known as Medusa in Japan from her own AJW years, started working together in May when the Fed toured Japan, and the feud would quickly come to TV with matches first on Monday Night Raw and then at SummerSlam 1994. The November the 20th show would feature Blaze defending the WWF Women's title against Nakano, and it would be Bull's last appearance in the company before embarking on a months-long tour as a WWF regular. The field for the V-Top tournament to decide the top women's wrestler in the world gradually takes shape. Hokuto's in it, and naturally so is Aja Kong. Aja's storyline going into the tournament is pretty simple. She's the unquestioned top dog in the company. By the time the Dome show rolls around, Aja Kong will have been holder of the WWWA World Championship, the company's top title, for a few days short of 2 years. She is the Jungle Emperor, one of the most dominant forces in wrestling history, the woman God made when he wanted the real thing. All of that. Aja's title will not be on the line in the tournament, but naturally she is the favourite. Representatives of JWP, LLPW and FMW will also be taking part, as will a couple of other AJW folk. Those will be decided in the company's Grand Prix tournament. Eventually, we finally end up with this lineup. First, we have Hokuto and Kon. The other company's entrants are JWP's Dynamite Kansai, LLPW's Eagle Sawai, FMW's Combat Toyoda. Some of these choices may be surprising. You might have expected to see Shinobu Kandori turn out for LLPW, or Megumi Kudo for FMW. But, well, politics as usual. Other companies don't want their top stars to job that way. As it is, we will see both of those talents on the card anyway. AJW's Grand Prix fills up 2 more spots on August 28th. We have tournament winner Yumiko Hotta and runner-up Manami Toyota, which leaves 1 more spot. We'll save that for a bit. And with this, well, most of the major pieces are set. We should start looking at the show in earnest. Of course, there will be a bunch more news items to look at along the way, but we'll throw those in as needed. As mentioned already, this is a gargantuan show, and our focus is on the big tournament that's going to take up most of the second half of the supercard. Still, there's plenty worth looking at in the show's first half, that's for sure. And so while we're not going to look at every match in detail, we're certainly going to have a rundown. Happily, the full Big Egg Wrestling universe is available right here on YouTube. More than that, it's available in absolutely stunning quality, like better than any other show from that time. And so, a big thanks is in order to Big Duel. I'll link to that channel because they're responsible not only for this tremendous rip, but also equally beautiful rips of The Dream Slam, Dream Rush, Wrestling Queendom and various other classic 90s AJW shows. This full DVD also features a lot of the important preamble, the fans making their way into the arena, the interviews, the conferences, and of course all the awesome presentation. Make no mistake, right from the opening bell, this is a show where AJW aren't going to take any half measures. They've got this dome and they're damn well going to use it for a truly state-of-the-art production. As we reach around about 2 PM on November 20th, 1994, and the opening bell strikes, a crowd of approximately 42,500 people have made or are making their way into the arena. The attendance was something that people had worried a little about, especially seeing as Zenjo hadn't been able to fill out the 17,000-seat Yokohama Arena, venue for 1993's Dream Slam, earlier in the year. But 42,500 in the dome for a Joshi show? That's already a huge number. The previous record attendance for a women's show in Japan was, reportedly, a mark of 19,000 that Mildred Burke had set during that original November 1954 tour. Needless to say, that mark has been royally smashed. And so, as the opening ceremonies finish, it's time for the spectacle to truly begin. A lot of the show's first half consists of pretty quick matches of around 10 minutes or so running through them's not too tricky. We start with a rather cool tag contest featuring 3 newer talents. Bomber Hikaru and Chapuita Asari take on Hiromi Sugi and Hiromi Yagi. Bomber Hikaru is the more experienced wrestler here and is a part of Chigusa Nagayo's new Gaia group, while Chapuita Asari is probably the most well known of this quartet. One thing worth noting that perhaps demonstrates how tough it is to make it not just in AJW, but in Puro in general, is that Asari was part of AJW's 1993 class. Here in late 1994, she's not just the only one of that class still in All Japan Women, she's the only one who's actively wrestling. Full stop. Asari became known for being an absolutely wild high flyer, and this first match sees one of the most outrageous moves of the whole show, Asari coming off top for her signature Sky Twister press to the outside. Shortly after, Asari executes a spinning dropkick on Hiromi Sugo for the win, but this is a very nice opener where Asari and Yagi in particular definitely impress. And this is followed by a little person comedy match. Buta Genjin and Little Great Muta taking on Tomezo Tsunakaki. I told you this show would have everything. All sorts of silliness abounds in this short comedy bout, of course, but it's here as a nod to Joshi Purore's history. Back in the 50s and 60s, Joshi often shared space on cards with little person bouts and the like because back then they were all considered as, for lack of a better word, freak shows. Happily, times have changed. A couple of other quick-fire spot fests with newer talent follow. Kandi Akutsu, Zenjo's junior champion, and Rui Tamada have a decent enough little bout, which Akutsu wins with her signature rolling German suplex. This bout was the final of a juniors tournament. The fourth bout, however, is the first that's generally considered a must-see, Suzuka Minami taking on Kaoru Maeda. Kaoru, again, is a part of the Gaia group, while Minami is actually coming close to the end of her career, and the two really put on a show here. Much like the earlier Dream Slam shows, the pace of these matches is often going to be fast as hell, meaning most things are exciting to watch, and this pair really go well with each other. There's a lot of exciting spots and moves, but also some good details and story too. Minami eventually picks up the win here with an absolutely thunderous Liger Bomb, but both do very well. Minami was always a very strong talent, although she did stick to what I suppose you would call the traditional AJW formula. She retired the following year at the age of 26. Conversely, Kaoru would have a very long and very varied career. She'd go on to some serious heights in Gaia, especially, and she wouldn't retire until August of 2022. The next section is certainly the most skippable part of the whole card. We do get a quartet of different style matches, meaning shoots. 1 kickboxing match, 1 regular boxing match, and 2 amateur wrestling bouts. Again, this grab bag sort of action is a bit of a nod to early Joshi history. While there's not a massive amount to say here, there's a couple of names of note. AJW's Kamiko Meikawa wins the kickboxing match against Suga Mayuki, and while she's not too well known in the West, she would be a pretty major talent for Zenjo in the latter part of the 90s, naturally famous for strong kicks. Unfortunately, All Japan were in major decline during this period, which is why she's sadly not better known. One of the amateur wrestling bouts features the 16-year-old Kyoko Hamaguchi against a more experienced French wrestler, Doris Blind. Kyoko being the daughter of pro wrestler and legendary New Japan trainer Higo Animal Hamaguchi. Kyoko had already been featured a little on TV and the like as a wrestling prodigy, although in this instance a pro wrestling win is hardly an ideal place to put on an amateur match, what with the ropes being in the way and so on. Animal Hamaguchi is also here in support of her daughter, as he would often be throughout Kyoko's career. While she wouldn't follow her father into pro wrestling, she had an excellent amateur career, including 2 Olympic bronze medals and 5 world championships. Up next we have a couple of matches where temperatures run a bit high. Chigusa Nagayo faces off against Reggie Bennett, and Chigusa strikes something of an angry figure. She's flipping Reggie off, and the two end up getting into it on the ramp. The match itself is the sort that is right in the Chigusa wheelhouse, lots of selling against a bigger opponent, and it generally turns out okay, although the finish is a little botched with Chigusa rolling Reggie up and Reggie kicking out when she wasn't supposed to. Apparently this miscommunication was due to Reggie being deaf in one ear and the ref's count happening on her deaf side. Chigusa gets on the house mic and essentially says that the Japanese crowds are never going to believe in a gaijin. Now, as an aside, gaijin is a very derogatory term, especially in this context, which is why I don't tend to use it nowadays as a term for a foreign wrestler. In fact, Chigusa actually gets some serious boos from the crowd for using the word. By the way, if you're a fan of foreign wrestlers swearing in Japan, Reggie Bennett does have a choice line or two in the post-match press conference.
There's no reason in the world for somebody to be saying, fuck you this, fuck you that. I'm not that type of person, and please excuse my language.
Apparently Chigusa's anger continued a fair bit backstage due to this botched finish. It is kind of a weird one, this. This is a transitory phase for Chigusa Nagayo, really, being that this is her last match in AJW before the full debut of Gaia Japan. As popular as Zenjo is right now, it's a very different and more male audience to the young female one that existed in her heyday, and as legendary as she is perhaps not as over as you'd expect, although she'd only wrestled a few times since her 1993 return. This match then does mark the end of a chapter. Gaia Japan fully opens its doors and runs its first show in April of 1995, she makes a full-time return to the ring, and with the success of Gaia, she successfully reinvents herself, as the greats tend to do. The following match really brings the pain. AJW's Toshio Yamada and Tomoka Watanabe take on LLPW's Shinobu Kandori and Mikiko Futagami. Oh boy, when Yamada and Kandori go at it, they seriously do. The amount of hate between the pair is something. Both Yamada and especially Kandori have legit backgrounds in wrestling and judo respectively, and they'll happily use them. It's damn good, one of many matches on the card that's well worth the watch. Watanabe and Futagami also fill their roles well, but this is definitely the Yamada and Kandori show. Eventually, however, the lethal submissions of Kandori do win out. After several attempts, she's finally able to lock in the Fujiwara armbar on Yamada in the centre, with Watanabe out of commission, and Yamada has no choice but to tap. A fine match, but there is actually more to talk about. Backstage drama. Not between this pair, but between Kandori and Akira Hakuto. Before the match, they'd met backstage for the first time in a few months, and they nearly went at it. Kandori sucker punched Hokuto, and they almost started properly duking it out before Yamada broke it up. Backstage fights? At the biggest show in the company's history? In my oh so respectful and sport-like Japanese Joshi professional wrestling? Well, it's likelier than you'd think. Sadly, we have no CCTV record of this action to look back on so that we can judge who's to blame based on our pre-existing biases. So, hey ho. The LLPW crew were very pissed off about the whole thing, with Kandori and company founder Rumi Kazama even trying to convince Eagle Sawai to shoot on Hakuto during their upcoming match at the V-Top tournament. And so this card kind of marks the end of a working relationship between LLPW and AJW, at least for now. Following this show, it would be quite a while before any LLPW talent stepped foot back into an All Japan Women ring, with Kandori herself not returning until the second half of 1997. Speaking of brawling, albeit happily of a worked nature, next up is a UWA World Tag Titles match between the teams of LLPW's Michiko Nagashima and Yasha Kurenai versus the defending champions Etsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda, aka Las Cachorras Orientales, or the Oriental Bitches. LCO, Wicked Entrance and all, are going to be one of the best tag teams of the 1990s, and whenever they're in the ring, things are going to get rowdy. And sure enough, there's plenty of wall-breaking action going on in this match, although Mito and Shimoda are also exceptional pro wrestlers. The LLPW team are certainly overmatched in this bout, but they try hard, even occasionally beating LCO to the punch with weapons attacks, but eventually the champs do defend. Mita plants Nagashima with a sick Death Valley bomb, a move that she originated. Up next is the Legends exhibition, and man, this one ends up going great. Jaguar Yokota and Lioness Asuka are coming out of retirement, as are their respective partners Bison Kimura and Magic Cat Yumi Ogura. We get the old school ref Jimmy Kayama along for the ride too. Everyone does well here, but Yokota and Asuka are the real stars. They start the match off and it takes seconds for them to show they haven't lost even the slightest step. This is especially true of Yokota. You wouldn't believe for a second that this is her first match since frickin' 1985. We get classics from all four of them. Great high flying, some killer hair tossers, the Asuka giant swing, awesome Jaguar Yokota moves. It's great. Unfortunately, this match ends in a slightly longer than 10 minutes draw, but they could have certainly gone on longer. Hell, Yokota looks like she could have gone way freaking longer. This match went so well, in fact, that 3 out of the 4 participants decided to make full returns to the win. Yokota would return to Zenjo Action the following year before setting up her own promotion, JD Star, at the end of 1995, and she would take Lioness Asuka and Bison Kimura along for the ride, who also both started wrestling for AJW again in 95. Yumi Ogura was the only one of the 4 who decided to stay retired, although she would return 9 years later for Zenjo's 35th anniversary. And as for Yokota, well, she's still going at the age of 62, primarily for Pro Wrestling Diana. What can you say? She's a machine. Following an intermission that's mainly focused on an exhibition for Indian professional wrestling, we have one last match before we finally get to the tournament, but it is another one that's worth a bit of detail. The debut of what was hoped would be a big new cross-promotional character for the company, a crime-fighting pro wrestler named Blizzard Yuki. The Yuki character would be played by the usually excellent Saki Hasegawa, there would be a manga series in the Shonen Ace magazine, and even a Super Famicom game, Bishoujo Wrestler Retsuden Blizzard Yuki Wanyu. Blizzard Yuki was supposed to be a big deal, hence the debut here against Mariko Yoshida, and it comes with the biggest entrance of the show, a load of Yuki lookalikes doing martial arts moves to the sound of Yamato's Suite No. 4, music that you likely associate more with Taka Michinoku, and even, in by far the single most ludicrous spot on the whole show, a stuntman Yuki-alike doing a nearly 20-foot drop from a freaking cage onto basically no padding. Yeah, needless to say, he got injured. All this leads to the real deal coming out, and then the match, which is not very good, unfortunately. The crowd is unfortunately rather dead for it. We're already in the 5th or so hour of this show, and you sense a bit of impatience. Hasegawa, as Yuki, is in an unenviable position of having to debut this new character with new moves in this huge arena, and it's clearly overwhelming. It's perhaps not surprising that Mariko Yoshida looks better here, although Yoshida would go on to be an all-time great. We do get a couple of very nice moves, particularly a tope con hilo from Yuki where she lands on her feet, but it doesn't really pull the crowd in. Eventually Yuki wins following a twist in senton. Hasegawa is clearly very emotional after the match and doesn't give an interview. Word was that she was also pretty concerned about the aforementioned stuntman and that fall. So basically you have all these things that ended up contributing to a rather shocking debut, one that it's tricky to really blame Hasegawa for. Blizzard Yuki was more of an alter ego for Hasegawa, a character that she'd break out a few times while mostly still working under her real name, but Hasegawa's retirement in March of 1996 due to injuries meant that the character's time did end up being pretty brief. So, after all this time, we're finally getting to the tournament. I'm sure you may be thinking that this show might be just a little bit too long and, well, you'd be right. Still, we're here now. Let's go through those participants again. Akira Hokuto, who may retire depending on the results of this tournament. Aja Kon, AJW's top dog and dominant champion. Yumiko Hotta and Manami Toyota, winner and runner-up respectively of the year's Grand Prix. Combat Toyota, 4-time FMW Women's Champion. Dynamite Kansai, who'd recently held the JWP Openweight title for nearly 2 years. Eagle Sawai, one of the toughest competitors in LLPW. And we still have an open slot. This is a bit of an odd one. Originally it appears as though this slot would be filled by Devil Masami. That was the report in the Observer. However, Masami wouldn't be in the tournament. She beat Kansai on September the 18th for the openweight title, and JWP clearly weren't willing to have their champion and one of their biggest stars jobbing in the tournament. For similar reasons, LLPW's Shinobu Kandori and FMW's Megumi Kudo would not be in the tournament, although it's quite surprising that Devil Masami ended up not being on the card at all. She's one of the highest profile names to not be here, alongside fellow JWP wrestler Mayumi Ozaki, another person you may have expected to see in this tournament. Azaki's absence is also hazy, but it has to do with heat between her and AJW's talent head and booker, Rossi Agawa. Ozaki has said that it was related to her age, which is, well, questionable on Rossi's part, seeing as Ozaki was 26, but then I wouldn't be surprised. In any case, after March 1994, it would be 10 years before Ozaki stepped foot into a Zenjo ring again. So, who takes the position? For a long time it was actually said that Dynamite Kansai was going to get a bye to the semi-final. However, the position was eventually filled at the last minute due to the cancellation of another match on the card. Kyoko Inoue was previously booked to have a mixed style match against Lucia Riker, an undefeated Dutch champion kickboxer who was, at various times, described as the most dangerous woman in the world. Initially Riker pulled out when she realised it was a work, although Shisu came around and decided to do the match. But when she realised she was going to be losing the bout, she pulled out again, citing an ankle injury. She does actually appear on the show to apologise for her absence. In any case, this freed up Kyoko Inoue to take part in the V-Top tournament, and she'll face Kansai in the first round. The other first round bouts will see Akira Hokuto meet Eagle Sawai and Aja Kon face off against Manami Toyota, two bouts where you imagine that speed's going to be facing off against strength. But we open up the tournament with Yumiko Hotta, Grand Prix winner, MMA practitioner and general badass, against FMW's Combat Toyota. Let's get going. Hotta definitely goes into this first match as the favourite. She may be smaller than Toyota, but she's the Grand Prix winner, and she's certainly got something that can cut Combat down to size, that being her kicks. Hotta is a vicious striker, and it doesn't take all that long for her to slap and kick that oversized wind eyeliner directly off Toyota's face. Toyota of course does get a few chances here and there to stick some power moves in, but it's very easy to get into a perilous position against someone like Hotta, especially if you get trapped upside down in the ropes and Hotta's able to land some more vicious kicks right at you. This match quickly develops into something absolutely excellent, as the power of Combat and the strikes of Hotta pair up beautifully, with there also being enough trash talk and character from these two to keep you invested in the slower moments, which, well, there aren't many of. Moves like the powerbomb and the Combat driver aren't enough to keep Hotta down, and Hotta's strong enough to perform her own big moves on Toyota. A couple of Tiger drivers result in some very close near falls. Hotta hits an absolutely wild straightjacket suplex from the corner, but Toyota somehow survives that. That's a move I've never seen before. Even a slight misstep on a top rope spinning heel kick isn't enough to really cloud the match, and Toyota seems to be dead weight after Hotta lands it the second time. Hotta's frustration shows as she assaults Toyota with kick after kick, enough that the referee has to repeatedly pull her away, and in the midst of the argument, Toyota gets a fleeting opportunity. She hits a bridging German suplex and gets the upset 3 count in 16 minutes 54. Hotta is utterly raging. She basically has the ref by the neck and the seconds have to pull her away. This match is bloody awesome, an absolutely fantastic tournament opener, and I would say the best match of Combat Toyota's career. Hotta is understandably upset in the post-match press interview, while Toyota goes on to face the winner of the next match. Eagle Sawai is certainly dressed to the max for this occasion, although it's hard to beat Akira Hokuto in this regard. She comes out all in blue, complete with signature big wig, sword and Mayu mask. Sawai's best opportunity is going to come by rushing out of the blocks, which indeed she does. She blasts Hokuto with power moves and gets a couple of near falls, largely controlling the first half of the match. There's a few very nice moves here, particularly a stalling double arm backbreaker, but Sawai misses a Vader bomb and Hokuto pushes back with a couple of spin kicks. Hokuto being Hokuto, naturally she'll make the big jump to the outside, but an attempt to pull Sawai back in by the hair ultimately leads to being knocked off and getting hit with a dropkick. Bit of a slow spot, that one. Sawai tries the Vader bomb again, but Hokuto gets her feet up. She manages to get Sawai over for a couple of German suplexes, but Sawai makes a last-ditch attempt at an armbar when Hokuto tries for the Northern Lights bomb. However, Hokuto escapes. Sawai tries a powerbomb, Hokuto escapes again, hits a backdrop. Somehow Sawai survives the first Northern Lights and even manages to get a small package when Hokuto goes for it again, but naturally the Dangerous Queen is not going to be denied. A second Northern Lights bomb is enough for Hokuto to advance in 11 minutes 08. This is a very classic sort of Hokuto match where she overcomes the bigger opponent, and it's an okay bout. The crowd don't get too into it, although I largely think that's because they didn't exactly buy Sawai as a credible opponent. Not that Sawai does anything bad, she's just not really on the elite level that the other wrestlers in this tournament are at. It's fair to say that the next match promises good things. Aja Kon vs Manami Toyota. This is the first time that the pair have met in singles since 30th August 1992, when Kon beat Toyota in the Grand Prix final, and well, they've only kicked on as talent since then. And yet, well, this is a match that's going to be stratospheric, even for them. If Aja is the daughter of King Kon, then Toyota is her Scream Queen. It's hard to really go through this as every last second of this match is so intense and filled with action, whether it's Toyota going up top for those big moves, or Aja's exceptional, powerful grapples, or just stretching and tying up Toyota like she's a bloody pretzel. Every last dramatic Toyota bridge out puts the Tokyo Dome crowd on the edge of their seat. It's not always been easy for this show to get the sort of big reactions from this crowd that they'd get in other smaller venues, but this pair does it with ease. There are some particular moments that stand out. The absolutely sick inverted power slam that Aja does to Toyota on the ramp, the huge dive from Toyota onto a prone Aja on the table, that damned dropkick to the outside, the frickin' victory star drop. But really just everything here is gold. Both of them throw the entire book at each other and then some. After a little over 17 minutes, Aja makes a critical reversal, sitting thunderously on Manami after a failed sunset flip in the corner. Toyota tries to reverse a backdrop, but is met with the Uraken. Somehow Toyota survives, but Aja then lifts her up and absolutely plants her with a Steiner screwdriver. And it's over. Absolute classic, this match. You must watch this. Both of these wrestlers are already on the top level, and this is where their rivalry really kicks into gear. The matches that this pair are going to have over the next couple of years, oh boy, it's a whole other level. This match got 5 stars from The Observer, and the tournament is worth watching just for this bout alone. We close out the first round with another contest that's got a lot of promise. Kyoko Inoue going up against Dynamite Kansai. You've got the showiness and heart of Kyoko against JWP's most prominent tough hombre, and once again this match absolutely meets high expectations. Kyoko's certainly got the spirit to match up against Kansai's strikes, as vicious as they are. Kansai's kicks can be utterly ruthless. Kyoko uses her speed to try and get the advantage, whether it's through handspring elbows or other more daring moves, and you do get a bit of showiness, such as a big old giant swing on the dome's ramp. Again, this is just another fantastic pairing. Kyoko is strong enough as well to be able to kick out of Kansai's Splash Mountain while delivering some more big shots, a very nasty elbow smash from the corner to the back of the head for example. Kansai Low has enough to kick out of some of Inoue's best, like the Niagara Driver. There is very little between these two all the way to the finish, but it's Inoue who makes the error. She goes to the top rope, but is met with a vicious kick that spins her right round. Kansai goes up and makes sure of it with the most devastating move in her arsenal, the Die Hard Kansai, a splash mountain from the second rope. This match rounds off an absolutely stunning first round of action. Considering that this pair had to follow the frickin' Con Toyota match, they're damn near as good and they keep the crowd's energy right up. Of course you would expect such greatness from these two. Kyoko Inoue in particular is right on the cusp of what would be, in 1995, a legendary wrestling year, and Kansai is one of those who just is never not great. The semi-finals are set then. Combat Toyota will face Akira Hakuto, and Daja Kon will take on Dynamite Kansai. Judging by the first round of action, we can expect plenty more awesome stuff later on. We do get 2 matches in between the first round and the semi-finals, and well, they're worth a little bit of coverage at the very least. One of these matches is another bout that was pretty well built up in the weeks before the show, and another is a hot match in general that features, well, men. The first of these bouts is known as the Miss Wrestling Universe match because it features 4 of the prettiest ladies in Joshi. The team of JWP's Hikaru Fukuoka and FMW's Megumi Kudo take on AJW's Takako Inoue and JWP's Cutie Suzuki. A big lump of the promotion for this match revolved around Takako, who had a photo book out with some risque shots in it, and there is also a little bit of drama. Megumi Kudo had accused Takako Inoue of leaking pictures to the press that featured her and her boyfriend. The match itself is fine. It's definitely a bit of a come down from the intense action that we've just seen, but it still keeps up the momentum. Again, we get some awesome spots. Takako Inoue likes to do this fantastic stalling tombstone variation where she'll happily knee the hell out of her opponent's head while she's got her up, and being that this is the Big Egg, she's naturally going to do that on the ramp. In the end, we're pretty much left with Takako and Kudo going at it, and this time it's the FMW star who gets the win. Inoue struggles, but Kudo hits a couple of Kodome drivers to get the free count after around 14 minutes. A perfectly fine tag match. Not an essential watch, but decent. Following that match, it's time for the Michinoku Pro folks to take the stage. Now you may wonder why we've got this match here on a women's wrestling card, but Zenjo and Michinoku Pro had a working relationship. High-flying Joshi stars such as Kaoru and Chapurito Asari had already appeared on Michinoku cards before now, so this kind of makes sense. This 6-man sees Kaintai DX's Sato, Dick Togo, and Shiru teaming with the Great Sasuke to take on Gran Naniwa, Jinsei Shinzaki, and Super Delphin. This is not exactly the most essential of Michinoku Pro 6-man tags, as you might expect. A lot of this is centred more around comedy action, but we do get bits of high flying here and there. Eventually Sasuke gets the win for his team, pinning Naniwa with a Thunderfire powerbomb. On the one hand, this match does act like another interlude of sorts. It certainly has a place on the card, giving plenty more time for folks to pick up merch or whatever if they've not done so yet. On the other hand, this match is 21 minutes and 45 seconds and, well, this show is long enough. The big problem with Big Egg Universe is most definitely the show's ridiculous length, and as the supercard gets closer to the finish, that's going to become a really big problem. Now I'm not saying that this would be the first match I'd cut, certainly not over all the different style bouts that happened earlier in the show, but a 20-minute, good but still totally inconsequential match like this one, when we're already around 8 hours into the event? I wouldn't be surprised if this started making people shift in their seats a bit, or perhaps start thinking about the train timetable. And so, it's time for the V-Top semi-finals. We waste little time as we get into this first one. Toyoda is, again, dressed splendidly, while Hokuto is out in pink for this semi. Hokuto actually gets the jump on the bigger Toyoda here, as opposed to what happened in her quarterfinal. She's quick to strike with a spin kick and a big tope con hilo from the top to the outside. Combat, however, does redress the balance with a really frickin' nasty backdrop driver. Real eesh that one. This and the combat driver aren't quite enough though, and Hokuto retains control after a sunset flip from the top and a Northern Light suplex. Toyoda gets back in again when she's able to press slam Hokuto from the ring all the way to the floor, and she starts to get into her wheelhouse, bringing a table into the ring. However, this will be her undoing. A powerbomb, Toyoda positions Hokuto on the table and goes to the top. However, Hokuto dodges the leg drop attempt. This looks nasty. Toyoda lands right on the edge of the table, and as we all know, those Japanese tables really don't give a whole lot. Hokuto is quick to seize the advantage, lifting up the agonised combat Toyoda and hitting the Northern Lights bomb for the win in a handily quick 5 minutes 47. As you may well have expected, the Dangerous Queen is going to be in the final. Is this the least essential match of the V-Top tournament? Yes, absolutely. Not bad or anything, but certainly a short one. Kinda wonder if this match may have had to be cut a little bit. Toyoda bows out, but even if this bout is not a classic, the match she had with Yumiko Hotta certainly was. Now, the second semi-final? You can definitely expect more fireworks here. Aja Kon and Dynamite Kansai already have something of a rivalry, seeing as they're the two toughest SOBs in their respective companies. They've fought each other a couple of times, and so far Aja has come out on top, but it's certainly been a fantastic watch. The order of the day here is certainly going to be strikes. You can tell that pretty quick when Kon hits Kansai with the Uraken right off the bat. Kansai is quick to recover with big strikes and clotheslines of her own, while also trying to ground Kon. The ground stuff never lasts too long, however, as this pair happily get on with blasting each other with every hard hit in their arsenal, and of course, it's utterly gripping to watch. Kansai nails some more hard hits and gets Kon up for the Splash Mountain after a struggle, but it's not quite enough. Another vicious Uraken almost results in a KO, but Kansai is able to get up. Yet more vicious hammers, and another Uraken knocks her down again, but once again she pushes through and hits a backdrop. Kon catches her in the corner though for a massive water wheel drop and near fall. Kansai still fights, swinging for the fences with roundhouse kicks, but Kon dodges. Kansai blocks 2 Urakens, but doesn't block a third, and a fourth. Amazingly, Kansai kicks out again, but Kon will not be denied, and a final, decisive Uraken is enough to give Aja the win in 12 minutes 22. Again, an absolutely fantastic match. Different from the match that Kon had with Toyota, but not all that far away from it. This was a remarkable, exceptionally stiff battle between two tough bastards, and once again Kon just about has the edge against Dynamite Kansai. Meaning that, as you may well have expected, it's going to be Aja Kon versus Akira Hokuto in the final, a match we should expect a lot from. However, there is one more bout before we get there. Our semi-main of the night will, in case you've forgotten, revolve around the WWF Women's title. Alundra Blaze has come over, and she'll be defending against Bull Nakano. Nakano's already started working for the WWF, and the pair had a big match at SummerSlam. Nakano hit Blaze hard, but the champion just about came out on top. Being that this is the semi-main, the entrances are naturally full of pomp, especially Alundra's. She comes out at the head of a big old motorcycle posse, riding out to the ring complete with Old Glory waving about. Hey, maybe if there was a little bit more room, she could have come out in a monster truck. Sure beats having a 5-minute bout in the middle of a card at a house show in a high school gym, doesn't it? So this match is certainly treated like a big deal, but the crowd aren't exactly super responsive for it. This isn't necessarily to do with Nakano and Blaze. This work may not be at the intensity of the match we've just seen, but they're not doing wholly bad things out there. It's more that we're now at around 11 PM, the show's been going for 9 hours, and the crowd is absolutely exhausted by this point. That and there's also quite a lot less of them. A lot of people had to leave before the show was over. For a start, anyone who was under 18 and unsupervised had to be home by 10:30 PM due to a curfew, and then, well, a lot of people had to leave just so they could catch their last train home. And so by this point a pretty significant chunk of the crowd had gone. That said, there were still around 30 to 35,000 enthusiastic yet very tired people in the dome by this point. The match itself isn't anything special. Bull and Alundra don't go all that long, with the match clocking in at 9 minutes 27, which is probably for the best. This is about where Bull pretty much has an answer for anything that Blaze throws at her. The defending champion simply can't get that much in the way of offence. Despite this, she still gets a few hope spots. She's even able to nail her German suplex finisher, which is how she beat Nakano at SummerSlam, but this time Nakano kicks out. Eventually the Bull's various and vicious moves are too much. Blaze is thoroughly defeated after Nakano lands the guillotine leg drop. Nakano's victory is treated like a big moment. She's lifted up to the skies by Kyoko Inoue, and it's all treated as if Nakano's just won a major title. It's how a big belt should be treated, isn't it? Shame that the belt's not treated that way by the WWF. Anywho, it is certainly a very big and very happy moment for Nakano, who'll hold the title for 134 days before dropping it back to Alundra. This reign, and this moment in particular, being the main thing talked about in her very recent and much deserved WWE Hall of Fame induction. And with that, we come to the 23rd and final match of the evening. The final of the V-Top tournament is the expected one, Akira Hokuto versus Aja Kong. Both have had pretty different paths to get here. Hokuto has arguably faced the two weakest participants of the field in the shape of Eagle Sawai and Combat Toyoda, although both of them certainly outweighed her, as does her final opponent. Aja Kong, meanwhile, has had an exceptionally tough route through the field. Manami Toyota in the first round, and Dynamite Kansai in the semi-final. Hell, it's likely not possible to get any harder than that. Both Aja Kong and Akira Hokuto make their way down into the arena from an elevator, and this time Akira Hokuto is in her usual colours, the white. And well, with all the pre-match introductions and ceremony out of the way, it's time to get on with this match. It is after all around about 11:20 PM. If you're still here at this point, you've committed to missing that last train and likely having an expensive cab ride home or stay in a hotel or whatever. So you should be able to muster something for this bout. As you may expect, this does take a similar form to the previous two Hokuto bouts, with the bigger person making use of that advantage. However, Kon is clearly a much more capable and formidable opponent, and she's very quick to pepper Hokuto with those ruthless kicks, slaps and charges. The first few minutes are virtually all Aja, with Hokuto only ever getting fleeting glimpses of offense, usually used to try and ground Aja and weaken her limbs. That's only brief and clearly not the way, however. Hokuto tries to match strikes with Kon, but, well, that's probably not a good idea either, as evidenced by the harsh slaps that Aja responds with, not to mention the nasty jumping pile driver that follows. As Aja stretches the hell out of Hokuto in a half crab, it's hard to see just how Hokuto can solve this problem. She's barely been able to lay a finger on Aja Kong. But then, a turnabout does come. Aja chucks Hokuto to the outside with a suplex, and then tries something unexpected. A tope. Hokuto dodges, and the tope goes badly wrong. Aja really catches her leg on those ropes, and Hokuto quickly follows with a somersault plunger from the post. However, something is hideously wrong. Aja Kong is screaming, in total agony. It's a serious blowout to the right knee. But still, after a fairly extensive break and a bunch of bandages, Aja Kong will continue. It should be noted that the last time this pair faced each other in August of 1993, it was Hokuto who would end up with a blown out knee that eventually affected the result of the match. And now, well, the shoe's on the other foot. I'm almost hesitant to say that this is entirely storyline, because Aja's selling of this knee injury is as convincing and as emotional as you can get. It's really something. But in any case, Hokuto absolutely takes advantage. She's certainly not going to leave the damaged limb alone, no matter how much it hurts. Hokuto appears keen to finish quick, and after some more punishment to the knee, the Dangerous Queen hits 2 Northern Lights bombs. However, Aja kicks out. Almost out of nothing, Kon throws a desperation Hurricane and hits the mark, giving her much needed recovery time, and she then follows this up with a Northern Lights bomb of her own. However, keeping on the attack is hard, the knee constantly playing up and Aja having to punch it to get the feeling back. Another Northern Lights bomb from Aja and another near fall. The amount of finishers here almost has shades of a present day WWE main event bout, especially when they're stolen ones. Aja tries to go for a splash but misses and has to get out again. When she comes back, Hokuto hits her with Witchcraft for another near fall. Hokuto goes for some missile drop kicks, but even despite the injured knee, Aja still attacks the second attempt with a kick, seriously trying to guts it out now. Aja tries a top rope move, but Hokuto reverses for a Nadawa Otoshi. Even though Aja can barely walk, she's still able to intercept Hokuto for another Hurricane, although hardly a full strength one, she can't get the rotation. A big backdrop from Aja makes you wonder if she can somehow eke this out, but Hokuto's able to dodge another Hurricane and nearly roll Aja up. For Aja, the knee, at this point, goes out for good. Hokuto takes no further chances. 1 Northern Lights bomb, 2 Northern Lights bombs, 3 Northern Lights bombs. And with that, Akira Hokuto pins Aja Kon in 20 minutes 24 to win the V-Top tournament. As we get close to the stroke of midnight, we get a rather emotional finish. The pair are, as you can imagine, utterly exhausted. Aja Kon actually presents the red belt, her WWWA title, to Hokuto, saying that this should be her title now. However, after the various ceremonies, the big check, the trophy and all of that, Hokuto refuses to take that red belt. Eventually the pair are crying on each other's shoulders. There's a promise from Akira Hokuto that she'll be here when AJW run the Tokyo Dome again next year, and with that, well, we're finally about done with the show. What to say about this final match? It is an odd one in many ways. The in-ring action and the story here is incredible, of course. Aja's selling, and we'll have a lot more to say about her performance in general, is truly something else. It's just a shame that the crowd were, by this stage, clearly so tired. If this were a shorter show, if the Dome had still been full and this match had taken place earlier, a brilliant storytelling match like this may well have blown the Big Egg's roof off, but the crowd just couldn't give that sort of response, and that's not really on them. That's on AJW for booking such a stupidly long show in the first place. As for the winner, well, what with the retirement story and all of that, you may well have expected Hokuto to come out on top in the end. It is, though, still an odd little one. In many ways, Hokuto's win in this tournament, particularly with what happens in the aftermath, basically feels like an unofficial WWWA title win. Although Hokuto doesn't actually win Aja's red belt, she did beat her. And yet, the main reason why Hokuto beat Aja was because of an unfortunate injury. Aja needed to have that injury in order for this to be pulled off. And so, oddly, despite losing in the end, and because of her other performances on the night, Aja kinda comes out looking stronger in the end because she gutted it out so damn much. With Hokuto getting that injury in their 1993 match, and Aja getting an injury in this one, it would have been great to have another decisive singles match between the pair, with both at full strength. Alas, that didn't happen. So, just how successful was this card? It may have been an utterly stupid length and all of that, but Big Egg Universe was an absolute stonker of a success for All Japan Women. The 42,500 strong gate was equal to about $4 million, 4 times the amount that the original Dream Slams gate had taken. You had well over $1 million, perhaps even $2 million in merchandise sales. Just the program alone took in $612,000, and then you had the TV broadcasting and the sponsorships. Just about every match on the card had some sort of sponsor. That right there's another $1 million. Easy. The Big Egg Universe tapes would also very soon be on sale at AJW shows for the low price of $316 for the full 4-tape set, so that's another big source of revenue right there. And you'd also have a PC Engine CD game, a title in the Fire Pro series using the show's branding. All in all, Zenjo's gross revenue for this show was likely around the $8 million mark, a truly phenomenal number. Around about $1.15 million was spent on the show's staggering production, and that was most certainly worth it considering just how damn amazing this show looked with all the big entrances, laser lights and what have you. In the end, this was an absolute triumph of a show in the Dome, more than comparable to the supercars that were won by the Big Egg's more regular residents, such as New Japan. Hell, Meltzer happily compared the gross revenue of Big Egg Universe to WrestleMania, and this was a show without any pay-per-view. As overlong and ridiculous as the show might have been, you can hardly argue with such success. As for the quality of the show, well, it is pretty damn good for the most part. It's not quite on the level of the Dream Slam, but it's not that far off. The V-Top tournament is most certainly where it's at, and there is undoubtedly one MVP there. There aren't many one-night performances better than Aja Khan's here. Aja Khan was the star in 3 classic bouts, all of which were very different from each other. Any one of those 3 bouts would have easily been the match of the night on near enough every card in the world, but to have all of them in one night? It's an absolutely outrageous performance. If someone asked me to point to an example as to why Aja Khan is one of the very greatest wrestlers of all time, I would go straight to this V-Top tournament performance, as it's got absolutely everything, from the sheer power to the mega strikes, the incredible pace and moves, the dominant arrogance to, in the end, the agony and emotion. It may well be the best performance in any one-night tournament ever, and I'm including the Super J Cup in that estimation. Outside of the tournament, there's certainly a lot of other good stuff, even if it all does kind of play second fiddle. Some cracking opening hits, a great Legends match that ended up bringing some fine talents back into the fold, the sheer entertainment from acts like LCO, Takako Inoue, Shinobu Kandori and Toshio Yamada. It doesn't all come off perfectly, and obviously there's a fair few different style bouts that could have been cut out, but when it comes to flat-out wrestling, this show has a damn fine hit rate, considering that there's 23 matches on it. You probably shouldn't try to watch the whole thing in one go, but split up over a couple of sessions. It's definitely worth a look. It is, after all, the high watermark for women's wrestling in terms of big shows, and the high watermark for All Japan Women. At the end of the show, Akira Hokuto did promise everyone that she'd be back for the next time that the company was in the Big Egg. But of course, there would not be a next time. As much as AJW's show, match and talent quality remained high, the various dealings that the Matsunaga brothers had in real estate and other assorted business ventures meant that as Japan's 1990s recession lengthened and worsened, their finances would be absolutely wrecked, and with it, so would the finances of All Japan Women. The Joshi bubble bursts in the second half of the 1990s, with 1997 in particular being a disastrous year. It's at this time that the scene completely fragments, with plenty of promotions like the aforementioned new setups, Chigusa Nagayo's Gaia Japan and Jaguar Yokota's JD Star, as well as Aja Khan's Arcean, Hyoko Inoue's Neo Ladies, and plenty more. A lot of the talent we've seen in this video will still be active, and these promotions will end up being good in their own right, although the scene does get tougher to follow. Eventually, as the Joshi scene heads further into a darker age, 2005 will see the hammer finally fall on All Japan Women. In April, the company, which was at the time the longest running wrestling promotion in Japan, closes its doors for good. Things are certainly a hell of a lot better for Joshi now than they were in those dark days, but Big Egg Universe still remains a seemingly unattainable summit 30 years later. Is it the greatest Joshi show of all time? Perhaps not, but it's certainly the biggest by a long distance, and it more than deserves its spot in the annals of wrestling history. Hopefully you've enjoyed this look back at it, and until next time, bye for now. Calgary, Alberta, Canada. 3 of the most famous words in wrestling history. As soon as you hear them, you automatically expect greatness. And indeed, we've got someone great to look at today. However, it's not someone with Hart as a surname. Instead, this Calgary native took a whole other path, one that led her to Japan, where she would become an incredibly successful foreign talent and the original monster heel in Joshi. Today, we're talking about Wanda Sin, a name who deserves a lot more recognition than she has already. After all, the work and gimmicks she had, briefly, in both WWF and WCW don't exactly do her an awful lot of justice. But in Joshi, where she's the first in a long line of legendary monster heels, she's a majorly important figure. Hall of Fame worthy? Undoubtedly. and it's about time to give her a bit of a retrospective and to see just how important that work really is. While there will be a bit of touching on Wanda's work outside of Japan, most of our story here is going to be spent in late 70s and early 80s AJW. So, let's get ripping. Born in 1961 in Calgary, Wanda Sin's childhood is kinda defined by wrestling fandom. Her family had front row seats to just about every Stampede show back in the 1970s, and she wanted to be a part of wrestling from a very young age. She even went to Ernest Manning High School in Calgary, the same school as Bret and Owen Hart, who were both friends with her. Bret later commented that when he first started wrestling in 1978, Wanda and her family would be cheering on from the front. It was around this time that Wanda's wrestling ambitions got well and truly serious. A family holiday to Honolulu introduced her to All Japan Women, which was airing on TV in Hawaii, and it was love at first sight. In a January 2001 interview with Canadian wrestling website Slam, she said she loved it because of the brawling. It was an all-girl company and there they were, blasting each other with chairs and whatnot. Unfortunately, Wanda Sin was turned down for training at Stampede because they weren't running a women's division and thusly they didn't train women. But not long after, a friend made her aware of a school in Encino, California, run by the First Lady of Women's Wrestling herself, Mildred Burke. And so, the 17-year-old Wanda cleared out her bank account, sent in an application complete with bio and photo, and was accepted by Burke immediately. Wanda Sin's time training with Mildred Burke was, as it goes, kinda brief, although not for any bad reasons. Burke certainly took interest seeing as Wanda already had quite the stature at 5'8" and 200 pounds odd. She said that Wanda could potentially be a female Jack the Ripper of wrestling. Training from the legend was good, even if it did end up being short-lived. Burke was also the booker of foreign talent for All Japan Women, and Wanda ended up being scouted by AJW in November. As soon as the AJW scouts saw her size, that was basically it. Wanda remembered them saying, "Hey, a fat girl, we like her." And so yeah, that was that. It was probably around August or September in 1978 when she entered Mildred Burke's school, November when Zenjo scouted and immediately hired her, and on January 4th, 1979, she was wrestling her first match. A Korakuen Hall main event tag team bout against no less a team than the Beauty Pair. Still incredibly green, by her own admission Wanda Sin could tie her boots, perform a backdrop, and not a lot else. And yet here she goes. All Japan Women threw her in right at the top. This first match sees Wanda Sin, under her new name of Monster Ripper, teaming with Mami Kumano against the Beauty Pair team of Jackie Sato and Maki Oida. The Beauty Pair were the stars of 70s AJW, a team who got the company's first huge TV ratings, had hit songs, and even had their own show. Mami Kumano was one of their main antagonists. Usually she teamed with Yumi Ikeshita under the name of the Black Pair, the Beauty Pair's heel equivalents. A lot of this match is all about brawling, which is probably to be expected, although an absolutely heated crowd certainly goes a long way. Generally when you watch a Beauty Pair bout, you can expect a rather consistent bass noise of schoolgirls screaming their heads off. Now, considering that it's literally Wanda Sin's professional debut, she acquits herself pretty well. Obviously she's very green, there are some mistakes, certainly some blatant carrying and all of that, but again, well, it's her first match. She's certainly using her size pretty handily against the Beauty Pair, that's for sure. The big shock, really, is that Monster Ripper and Mami Kumano win the match. A bear hug, a couple of nasty Tree of Rose splashes, and a body slam is enough for the Ripper to win on her pro debut. Winning on a debut like this is something that never happens in pro res, usually. What of the dojo system, being a young lion, eating nothing but losses for 5 straight years and all of that? Nope, Monster Ripper is going straight up there. Her size is just more than enough for that to happen. Mere weeks after Monster Ripper's shocking debut victory, she faced Jackie Sato in late January 1979. Sato's WWA title is not on the line, but this serves as something of a prelude for what's to come later. The sheer power of the Ripper is certainly apparent. She can cause a hell of a lot of damage just with her body alone, not to mention her ability to perform crunching bear hugs and full Nelsons, or press slam Sato with ease. It's this sort of thing that hadn't been seen much before in Joshi, a level of strength far beyond anyone else in Zenjo. One particularly cool spot sees Ripper trap Sato between herself and the ropes for some vicious body attacks. Quite cool and novel, and it kind of makes you forget that this is someone literally weeks into their pro career. Sato uses her speed to get some hope spots, but soon enough the whole thing becomes chaotic as weapons get used, particularly a big old spanner and a metal bin. The seconds can't help but step in, Jackie gets overheated and takes out the ref when he tries to intervene, and ultimately Ripper is declared victorious by disqualification. Clearly we haven't seen the last of this. For Jackie Sato, a new and seemingly immovable force is going to be coming for her and the red belt. As green as Monster Ripper is, it doesn't take long for her to start making pretty good accounts of herself. There's certainly a few parallels to her in the annals of wrestling. I'd say that the Giant, Paul White, in WCW is a pretty good one, seeing as he only debuted in late 1994, was in WCW mere months later, and eventually won the world title within a year of his pro debut. But it's not surprising really. Often when you're that sort of size, greenness gets damned to hell in the eyes of the bookers, and Monster Ripper certainly stood out against everyone else on the Zenjo roster. She was going to be a big deal fairly quick. Still, adapting to this whole new situation could be pretty tricky for the young Wanda, particularly because she did face some early animosity from the established Zenjo talents, who weren't all that willing to help her out and were quite stiff with her in the ring, unaccustomed as they were to losing to foreign talents at all, let alone someone with such little experience or training. Wanda, by all accounts naturally a very nice person indeed, struggled to deal with this at first and found it very difficult to adapt to the harsh and quite often toxic atmosphere that existed in All Japan Women. But in her words, she did get some very helpful advice from a Stampede superstar who'd come over for a New Japan tour. That person being Dynamite Kid. Dino's advice to Wanda Sin was what you would probably expect. He said to her that in order to get respect, you've got to defend yourself, not take the crap anymore, and give all that stiffness back just as hard. This advice happened to work, and once Wanda started doing that and getting respect from the native talents, things generally got quite a lot easier. Monster Ripper certainly took the chance that she had to shine, particularly in various early matches that were generally extended squashes. She certainly took well to the task of hand, that being beating up the crowd's favourites. The likes of Mimi Hajiwara and Lucy Kayama tried, but they couldn't compete. Even when the seconds occasionally interfered to try and get shots in on the Ripper, it didn't take long for her to retain the advantage, hit something like a massive press slam or a big torture rack, and get the win. Things are moving very fast indeed, and we soon come to a big career highlight. Not long after Ripper and Kumano's triumph over the beauty pair, the big face team broke up, with Jackie Sato beating Maki Oida in a February 1979 career match. Following this, Monster Ripper would be Sato's main opponent for the rest of 1979 and 1980, feuding over the WWWA World title, the biggest prize in AJW, also known as the Red Belt. Monster Ripper would take on Sato, the defending 3WA champ, on July 31st, 1979 in a thoroughly heated match at the Denen Coliseum. The bout is unfortunately cut a fair bit, but Sato holds her own against the Ripper for some time, trying to make this as technical a bout as possible. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise. Sato was the top star, and she'd held the title for 637 days by this point. However, the whole complexion of the match changes when the black pair attacks Sato on the outside, leaving her majorly bloodied up. Sato is now barely able to muster anything against the Ripper, even as the audience starts quite literally weeping, and while there's a couple of hope spots, eventually she cannot continue. Monster Ripper is the new WWWA champion. And again, she's just 18 years old, mere months into her professional wrestling career. Like, they're starting at the top, and then there's doing what Monster Ripper did. Monster Ripper's reign would be short, mind you. After just 44 days, she faced Sato in a rematch, this time with no interference. Ripper shows off her strength, again dominating the first half of what would be quite a long bout, although the 36-minute length is cut here to show around about half of the match. Sato is again put in a position where the seconds are having to see to her injuries, making it appear as though once again she may not be able to continue. However, Sato is able to make Ripper miss big. Slowly but surely, Sato gets the advantage in the match, a big body press to the outside causing lots of damage to the Ripper, and a big rush of offense, big clotheslines, a splash, and finally a backdrop hold is enough for Jackie Sato to get the quick pin on Monster Ripper, albeit perhaps a far too quick one, and win back her 3WA title. Still, it was only enough to keep Ripper down for the 3 seconds. The amount of brawling and holding back afterwards suggests that this isn't over by a long chalk. Indeed, the third title match between Jackie Sato and Monster Ripper would take place on the 15th of March 1980 in Kanagawa. The first half or so of this match ends up being some of the most technical work we've seen in the feud so far, an area where Sato undoubtedly has the advantage and is able to put on some telling submissions and get some near falls. Ripper's power moves always have a fair bit of impact when they land, and sometimes she's able to just ragdoll Sato around. However, Sato is also strong enough to land the odd slam on Ripper. That and Ripper is also able to show off some agility, sprinting off the ropes, Vader Bomb style, to drop on Sato. Ripper slingshots Sato to the outside, and at this point all hell breaks loose. The black pair attacks Sato, while Sato's seconds also try to take on Ripper, both attempting to stop the wrestlers from returning to the ring. However, Ripper is able to get back in, while the black pair are too strong for Sato. She can't beat the count, and Monster Ripper is champion for the second time, because titles do change hand by count out here. All these are fine matches, especially if you enjoy the style and the brawling that comes with it. They are certainly, as mentioned, absolutely simmering with heat. The crowds are well and truly deafening for these bouts, make no mistake. Unfortunately, the fourth and final match in this feud, on August 8, 1980, is missing and believed to be lost, which is a shame. However, the end result didn't see a clear winner. By all accounts, this final match descended into absolute chaos with all manner of seconds entering the fray until it was declared a no contest and the 3WA title was held up. It is a little frustrating that we don't end up with a clear winner in this feud, but then that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. However, there is a certain symmetry here in that the feud ends basically as it started in January of 1979, a match that becomes a complete cluster schmoz with no real winner. The feud largely produces good action. It's not necessarily one for technical wrestling, but it is certainly one for hate. Monster Ripper may still be pretty green in a lot of these matches, of course. She's rocketed up the card incredibly quickly after all, but she is certainly carryable for a lot of this. Even at the points where things do get a little sketchy, usually the massive heat in the crowd is enough for it to not matter a whole lot. These matches are certainly worth watching. Jackie Sato would win the title for a third time on December 16, 1980 in a one-night tournament, first defeating Rimi Yokota, later Jaguar Yokota of course, in a classic semi-final, and then conquering Nancy Kumi in the final to take the red belt once again. Sato's last few months in AJW are all about passing the torch over to Yokota as the next big singles face star. She passes said torch by dropping the red belt to Yokota on February 25, 1981, before retiring 3 months later on May 21st. Now, Sato was actually still only 23 at this time, nowhere near the then mandatory AJW retirement age of 26, but Zenjo basically asked Sato to retire early so that she wouldn't be hanging around and taking any shine off the new top program. In case you need reminding, All Japan Women could be a toxic and cruel place, and this is just one example of how fickle the people who ran it were, even going beyond the base bullshit of having the mandatory retirement age in the first place. Unsurprisingly, the new top face would eventually go up against Monster Ripper. While Yokota and Ripper had plenty of tags against each other, and no doubt more singles than what we have available to us, the main match between the two happened on April 7th, 1982 for Yokota's red belt. And yeah, this bout is incredible. Jaguar Yokota is, of course, one of the greatest of them all. As a wrestler, she is just so ridiculously ahead of her time. However, a couple of years down the road, Monster Ripper has improved a hell of a lot since the feud with Sato. She's always had the strong presence, but she's able to project that strength even better, she's developed some technical chops, and naturally she's a lot more experienced. So while Yokota may be taking the lead here, Ripper is a very ideal partner, and the end result here is an outstanding David versus Goliath type battle between the main monster and the big face. All the power moves are so impactful and the comebacks timed so beautifully. Wonderful stuff. Eventually a big rally from Yokota sees her hit some massive flying drop kicks, disorient the hell out of Ripper with an airplane spin, and finally haul her over with a German suplex for the 3 count. This is most definitely the best bout of Wanda Sin's career, and she plays a magnificent part of it. Definitely go and watch this one. A big chunk of the latter half of Monster Ripper's first AJW run sees her go against other similarly tough wrestlers, as well as providing more of a tricky task for some of the hotter younger wrestlers coming up, like the Crush Gals. One particular match of note here is a November 1983 bout against Devil Masami. This would be the first chain match in the history of AJW. As you might expect, there's a fair bit of brawling here, and while it's not exactly the best match in the whole of this video, you do get some pretty cool moments here and there. Eventually, Masami gets the win by trapping Ripper in the ropes, wrenching her arm, and forcing a submission. By the time we get to 1985, Monster Ripper herself, now often using a fair bit of face paint, is passing the torch to a new crop of sadistic monster heels. Dump Matsumoto, Bull Nakano, and the Atrocious Alliance are here, and they're going to be in the top heel spot. Monster Ripper and Dump Matsumoto would often take on each other in tag team action, a battle to see just which of these monsters was the toughest, but usually Dump would come out on top, and it is about here where Ripper's first Zenjo run comes to an end. Through that time she'd certainly made a whopping impact, winning the red belt twice, being a part of some very famous feuds, and improving greatly as a wrestler along the way. She started out at a quite phenomenal high on the card, way over pushed considering that she was literally a novice, but as evidenced by the later matches against Jackie Sato, other strong bouts against folks like Nancy Kumi, Lioness Asuka and Noriota Teno, and particularly the brilliant 82 match with Jaguar Yokota, she got way better over time. Now, it was often the case when talking about Monster Ripper that there's kind of a big gap between this one in AJW and the later entry into WWF as Bertha Faye, almost as if she didn't do anything during that time. However, that is most certainly not the case. There's plenty of action to talk about between 1985 and 1995 as Wanda Sin wrestled around the world, not to mention returning to Japan and AJW during this time. There was, of course, something of a homecoming. Wanda had first appeared on Stampede wrestling cards in 1983 between trips to Japan and Mexico, but when Stampede decided to make women's wrestling a regular thing on their cards in the mid-late 80s, they would naturally give her a call. In Stampede, she was dubbed as Wanda Singh with an H on the end. The idea here was to pair her up with the Great Gamma Singh, one of the company's top heels, although this didn't really happen. Wanda Singh was awarded Stampede's Women's Championship in 1987 after defeating Wendy Richter in Puerto Rico, more on that in a little bit, and held the title for a good while before losing it to Chigusa Nagayo in 1988. And even though the Stampede territory was pretty much on the way out at this point, it's probably fair to say that this was her favourite place to work, being that it's her hometown and all. In 2001, she said that Stampede was the best territory anyone could work in, the people she met there were all still her friends, everyone had a good time and there were no problems in the dressing room. As far as backstage went, Wanda Sin was essentially one of the boys, preferring to be in the same locker room as them, and indeed most of the big names in Stampede are the folks who were amongst her closest friends in the biz, including the aforementioned Gamma Singh, the Hearts and Bad News Allen. Mexico and Puerto Rico were also regular spots for Wanda Sin. In Mexico, she wrestled both in EMLL during the late 80s and a couple of years in AAA in the early 90s, where she would be billed either as Monster Ripper or La Monstra. She wrestled as Monster Ripper in Puerto Rico's WWC for a fair bit of time in the late 80s and early 90s, and it's here where she'd have another one of her more famous feuds, this time against Wendy Richter. Back when Richter was in WWF, before the infamous double cross, there was an idea of running Ripper versus Richter there. However, Fabulous Moolah wanted half of their money as a booking fee, and Wanda Sin balked utterly at that. And so, it happens here in Puerto Rico, and it ends up going damn well. Richter and Ripper have several quite lengthy, for Western women's wrestling, and highly heated bouts, including one inside a steel cage. There's some pretty cool stuff here, especially seeing as they're usually given more than the 5 or so minutes that women's wrestling would often get in US promotions around this time. And of course, throughout most of this period, Monster Ripper was still doing work in Japan. It's not talked about as much as her early 80s one, but she would return to All Japan Women in the early 90s. Before that, Ripper was first enticed back to Joshi by the formation of the original JWP in 1986. Jackie Sato was a big part of the formation of this promotion, one that would happily welcome wrestlers over AJW's retirement age, designed to finally bring some competition to Zenjo's door, which it most certainly did. Monster Ripper didn't do an awful lot in JWP, as it appears she was only there for a short time. The idea of bringing her in appears to have been to rekindle the flame and do a rerun of Ripper vs Sato, but this didn't really happen, mainly because Sato herself didn't spend too long in JWP. She got into it somewhat with a young Shinobu Kandori, culminating in an infamous shoot incident on July 18, 1987, when Kandori and Sato started firing serious live rounds at each other in a bout. Shinobu Kandori had legit martial arts chops and, well, this didn't go well for Sato, basically. She left JWP soon after and retired from the ring, this time for good, in 1988. This is something that's probably worth covering in more detail if I ever look at shoot incidents in wrestling again, but I digress. Monster Ripper also wrestled a few matches in Atsushi Onita's nascent FMW in 1989, this time under a new name, Delta Dawn. Now the name seemed intriguing. I wondered if this would be some sort of proto-Birth of Faith in, what with there being the country song of the same name and all that, but it's not really. It is still very much in Monster Ripper land. Anywho, she'd largely wrestle against the Greek talent Despina Montagas. Here we're seeing the pair go at it in a strap match on FMW's December 1989 Battle Creation show. In 1991, with All Japan Women in a period of transition from the Crush Gals and Atrocious Alliance years into the heady days of 1992 and onwards, and with any age restrictions now dropped, Monster Ripper would make a return to Zenjo in 1991, largely with the aim of taking on some of the new and younger monsters that were kicking around. It is perhaps appropriate that her return bout, or at least the first we can track down here, sees her taking on a 20-year-old Aja Kong who's on her way to the top. This 21st April 91 bout has just the sort of start you'd want, lots of hatred, and it doesn't take long for the toys to come out, both Kong and Ripper striking at each other with metal boxes and chairs. It's rare for Aja Kong to meet someone in Zenjo who is of similar stature to her, and Ripper is occasionally able to throw Kong around, even hitting a pretty sweet double arm suplex. However, it only takes a few minutes for things to descend into chaos. Aja does nail 2 urakens, but Ripper's able to get a foot on the ropes. From there, both grab weapons and clash them about, hitting the ref with them when the poor sod tries to intervene. A no contest is declared at the 9.5 minute mark, although this hardly stops the fight. They still go at it, even as many seconds and officials try to keep them apart. It gets a bit odd from there. The pair appears to agree to 5 more minutes, but after Ripper beats on Aja a bit more, well, she kinda just buggers off, so this 5 more minutes didn't even really start. We do get a bit more fighting and more pulling apart after this, but it is all a bit of a mess. Rather disappointing after a hot start that we get this sort of overbooked cluster schmuzz, and the crowd, who clearly just wanted to see this pair duke it out, boos the hell out of most of this. A shame, really, especially as we don't really get another Kong vs Ripper singles bout. The main focus of this second run ends up being Monster Ripper going against the top woman of the day in AJW, that being Bull Nakano, who'd held the red belt since January of 1990. On the 29th of April 1991, a few days after the Kong match, Ripper faces Nakano for the 3WA title at Korakuen Hall. This ends up being a pretty good one. It's certainly not a technical classic, but it is for sure a brawl, complete with Monster Ripper kicking off proceedings nicely by choking and chucking around Bull with all of the streamers that are still in the ring. Both of the wrestlers end up bleeding, chairs are used, rows of them are put to the sword, we get the nunchucks. There's a lot of fighting here, and quite a lot packed into what's only around 11 minutes. As much as Zenjo is very much heading towards quite technical and intricate bouts at this time, Monster Ripper's second one sees her in a good role as, essentially, a throwback to the brawl-focused wrestling of the 1980s. In the end though, Nakano is able to eke out a win. Ripper gets deadly close with a powerbomb, but misses a senton, and Nakano quickly takes advantage with the somersault leg drop to get a free. Bruised, but still the champ. This, however, most certainly isn't over. The really big date of this second run, and indeed perhaps the most epic bout in the career of Monster Ripper, happens on November 21st, the main event of one of AJW's big yearly shows, WrestleMarine Pad. This is a tag team steel cage bout pitting the rather uneasy team of Monster Ripper and Bull Nakano against Aja Kong and Bison Kimura, and it takes place under last woman stand-in rules. The other team must basically be knocked out. Suffice it to say, this is a big old brawl. All the weapons you can eat, the cage getting used aplenty, and naturally quite a bit of claret. A storyline going into this match is that Aja Kong is carrying an injury to her stomach, so obviously that's something Ripper and Bull focus on. While Kong doesn't usually wear white, it certainly puts a lot of focus on the bleeding. Again, don't expect anything in the way of technical action here, because it's not going to happen. It is fun if, like me, you enjoy a good brawl, but your mileage may vary. The crucial moment comes when Aja and Kimura are able to get the monsters down. Bison Kimura hits a splash off the top of the cage, Aja goes for a big one off the cage on Bull, but she misses. Aja basically gets eliminated here. This, combined with the stomach injury, absolutely takes her out of the action, leaving Kimura alone to deal with this team. She tries, but it's way too much. After a few more minutes, a couple of splashes leave her knocked out. The Ripper and Nakano team win, but almost immediately when the bell has rung, yeah, there was kind of obviously going to be a turn here, wasn't there? Ripper blindsides Nakano, beats the hell out of her, and the second match is on. Ripper is challenging for the red belt right frickin' now after a quite long and rather savage cage bout. Once again, weapons all over the shop. The already bloody Nakano takes even more punishment here, and the task appears to be insurmountable. Powerbombs and the like seem to get ever closer to taking her out, but then one glimpse of an opportunity allows Bull to hit a huge German suplex. From there, Bull goes up to the top of the cage and hits the absolutely huge guillotine leg drop off of it. This is enough to put Monster Ripper down for the count. In the end, this whole thing goes for a little over 35 minutes. It's certainly long, and I feel that in particular the section where Bull and Ripper just relentlessly beat up on Kimura could probably have been shortened, but it is certainly a big moment for Nakano. That top rope leg drop is most certainly worth the price of admission, that's for sure. On the whole, a pretty fine watch. This brings an end to Monster Ripper's time in All Japan Women. There are a couple of other matches, including one where she gets a win over Akira Hakuto, but her final match in the company happens on the 26th of November, when the team of Nakano, Hakuto and Bat Yoshinaga defeat the kind of random team of Ripper, Manami Toyota and Suzuka Minami. This is a short one, but one that does serve a purpose. A legendary monster returns, a master of the old styles, the old ways of brawling that provide a new test for this generation, but she eventually gets overcome. It is a handy role indeed, and we do get quite a bit of fun out of it. Anything technical does go entirely out of the window, and Ripper perhaps doesn't quite move as well as she did 10 years previously, but that is understandable. She can still brawl with the best of them even if there is a bit of wear and tear. With this finished, the next couple of years for Wanda Sin were largely spent in Mexico with AAA. As mentioned, she did a fair bit of work as La Monstra in Mexico, entirely as a Rudo and as part of a stable called Las Nasty Girls with La Briosa and Neftali, with Lola Gonzalez being a particularly regular opponent for her. Again, she's very prolific here, although there's not as much footage available here as one would hope. And then, in early 1995, the call came from Titan Towers. So yeah, we obviously have to talk about Bertha Faye a bit. One thing that does need to be remembered is that what Bertha Faye would become certainly wasn't the original plan for her. That original plan was much more in the vein of Monster Ripper. Wanda Sin was, it appears, brought into WWF on Alundra Blazer's recommendation. Their paths would have certainly crossed either in JWP or AJW, where she'd wrestled as Medusa. WWF was still serious about the women's division, and Wanda debuted on the April 3rd, 1995 Raw, straight after Alundra Blaze had won her title back off Bull Nakano. She attacks her after the match, and her presentation is Well, it's Monster Ripper, basically. Makeup, power moves, the lot. The idea here is that Ripper attacks Blaze to take her off television while Alundra got some cosmetic surgeries, would then feud with Nakano in that time, and then go against the returning Blaze in the summer. However, Bull Nakano gets fired from WWF almost immediately after this due to cocaine possession, going back to All Japan Women. This pretty much scuppers the idea of the women's division being taken seriously, and we get the repackaging soon after. Here's Bertha Faye, complete with terrible unflattering costume, and Harvey Whippleman as manager. The in-ring here is largely miserable, of course. Things are basically focused on comedy now, which doesn't help matters. The matches she had outside of Alundra Blaze could be rather terrible indeed. Her debut against Pantera on a May Raw coming in for special derision, and the matches that she and Blaze had weren't that good either. The pair didn't really get on at all out of the ring, and didn't have much chemistry in the ring. Bertha Faye and Harvey Whippleman didn't have much chemistry either. Again, they just didn't really get on outside the ring. Still, Ronda did generally get on with most everyone else from the sounds of things. Again, she was still one of the boys, and she particularly got on with Owen Hart, loving the Rocket's litany of jokes. That and, as mentioned by Brett in his tribute to Ronda, she would readily put a more established woman in her place if she noticed they were bullying the younger talents. As far as backstage goes, it's hard indeed to find the slightest of bad words about Ronda, as she's as nice as they come. On the Grappling with Canada podcast, longtime wrestling photographer Dr. Mike Lano said that she was someone who'd always bring extra water, sewing kits, all sorts to the back for everyone. She was up for the partying and whatnot, and a total wrestling nerd who could happily chat about the slightest minutiae of women's wrestling history for Canada if needed. It kinda goes without saying that Ronda hated the Bertha Faye gimmick. It wasn't her identity and was completely different to anything she'd done as Monster Ripper, which was far more her style. Ronda was a big horror fan. It begs the question, is there ribbing going on here with this gimmick? Inside jokes, Dusty Rhodes style? There aren't many Berthas in wrestling history, it must be said, although there is Bertha von Raschke, which, yes, was Baron von Raschke in a very poor disguise that allowed him to second Rick Martel in 1985 AWA. Is it reaching to suggest that the Bertha Faye gimmick is referencing that? Very possibly, but then this is WWF and Vince McMahon we're talking about here. Largely, Ronda's time in WWF felt, almost in her own words, as if she was prostituting herself for Vince out there, and there was basically nothing happening on the storyline front. Just going out there, doing crap for a couple of minutes, and getting a check. As for the general timeline of matches, that's fairly straightforward. Bertha Faye does win the women's title from Blaze at SummerSlam, and then loses it back after 57 days on an episode of Raw. There is one last gasp of the women's division being taken seriously when Aja Khan and others are brought in for Survivor Series, but Blaze gets fired not long after. We get the infamous women's title being dumped in the bin on Nitro, and that's the end of that. Obviously there's not much else for Bertha Faye to do, and she asks for her release soon after, with the Survivor Series match where her team beat Alundra's team being her last match in the company. It is quite the shame indeed that this is what Ronda Sin is largely known for, at least when it comes to the West. It's a dreadful gimmick, the wrestling is awful, and yeah, there's just not anything good here. There is one other little thing worth pointing out though, something that's a personal achievement for her more than anything, that she talked about in early 2001 with Slam Wrestling. There was one thing she was really focused on when she was in WWF, an ambition to wrestle at Madison Square Garden. She got to do that on the 6th of October 1995. She entered MSG as the champion and left there as the champion, having had what she thought was one of the better matches she'd had with Blaze. This was, at the very least, one little highlight of her time in the Fed. The next couple of years for Ronda were largely spent in the Can-Am Wrestling Federation. There were thoughts of returning to Japan, but the state of Joshi over there meant that payouts weren't exactly guaranteed anymore, so that didn't happen. And then she ended up in WCW around late 1999. Again, there's not exactly much good to say here. Very little wrestling at all to speak of, a couple more matches with Medusa, a feud with Miss Elizabeth, and generally being used as comic relief. Probably one of the more infamous segments here is a Vince Russo standards and practices bit, where he complains that ratings are down because he can't call Wanda Sin fat. Still, Wanda wasn't too negative about WCW. She said in January 2001 that they were an upfront organisation and they knew exactly what they wanted her to do. It doesn't appear as though Wanda did any wrestling after WCW, meaning that her final match took place on May 5th, 2000 against Miss Elizabeth on Thunder, where she ended up getting racked by Lex Luger. She didn't officially retire as such, and did say in January 2001 that she wouldn't hesitate to return to another major promotion. It didn't really matter as long as she was paid and treated fairly. On the state of the ladies divisions back then, she bemoaned that a lot of ladies could only work 5 minutes, or they only knew 5 moves, largely because not a whole lot more was expected, but that everyone had the potential to do more. She said that if they went to Japan, they'd come back great. They had the bodies, but they needed the ring sense. At this time, Wanda was working as a caregiver. Sadly, Wanda Sin passed away suddenly on July 27, 2001. She was only 40 years old. The cause of death was a heart attack, attributed by the family to medical problems. It's another deeply sad premature death in the wrestling business. When Wanda passed, there were a lot of comparisons made between her and Terry Gordy. They were nearly the same age as each other, with Wanda being only a couple of months older. Both achieved great success in wrestling before they'd even hit their 20s. Both were particularly successful in Japan, where they were monstrous and influential heels. This success wasn't necessarily reflected in their respective WWF and WCW runs, and in the end both sadly passed far too soon. Gordy died on July 16th, 11 days before Wanda. While there are differences, there are certainly comparisons to be made when it comes to the impact they had in Japan and their natural abilities. Both were very effective indeed in their role, and Wanda in particular is the first important monster heel in all of Joshi, the start of an incredible line that includes Dump Matsumoto, Bull Nakano, Aja Khan, and many others. Indeed, as acknowledged by Bret Hart, she was the first Calgary-born wrestler to make it big on an international stage, way before any Hart did. Her funeral was attended by well over 100 people, with many wrestlers in attendance including Bret and other Hart family members, Gamma Singh and Bad News Allen. And perhaps the last words here are best left to the Hitman, who paid tribute to Wanda in his weekly Slam Wrestling column. I drove by Wanda last week, saw her walking on Bow Trail. I wish I hadn't been in such a hurry that day and had stopped to say hello. It's sad when the roar of the crowd fades, leaving too many wrestlers with memories greater than their dreams. Bye for now.